Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Pamela Buchbinder. Jacob Nolan was born in 1991 into a wealthy family in Miami, Florida. As the third child in the family, he received a lot of love from his parents. They realized that he was different from his peers. However, at the age of 5, Jacob was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. When Jacob turned 15, his family noticed that he was experiencing significant mood swings. Despite this, he was doing well in school. He created an educational smartphone app and won a competition in Miami. However, a month later, Jacob couldn't get out of bed, had no motivation to do anything, even stand up. They finally brought him to a doctor who diagnosed him with depression and anxiety. At 17, Jacob expressed that he no longer wanted to live. His parents noticed his unstable behavior and mental state, prompting them to take him to a hospital where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This serious mental illness involves extreme mood swings, ranging from depression to emotional outbursts. Those affected feel trapped in their own thoughts. After finishing high school, Jacob enrolled in college while continuing his treatment. Throughout this time, he saw various psychiatrists who prescribed increasingly stronger medications. From the ages of 17 to 20, Jacob underwent numerous treatment courses, took 5 to 6 pills daily, and tried around 30 different medications, yet none seemed to help. By 2012, at 21 years old, Jacob was still deteriorating. His parents were deeply concerned and unsure of what steps to take next. Then, one day, a relative from New York, Pamela Buchbinder, called with an offer of help. Jacob's parents were relieved, thinking they had gotten help. However, they had no idea of the challenges that were about to come to their family. Pamela, a 43-year-old psychotherapist, lives in Chelsea, Manhattan, with her 4-year-old son, Calder. She and Jacob Nolan are cousins with a 22-year age gap. Jacob was the godfather of her son. In 2012, Pamela offered to help Jacob by inviting him to move from Florida to her apartment. While living with her, she provided him with therapy sessions and prescribed medication. In exchange for her help, Jacob took responsibility for Calder's care. Jacob trusted her completely. In one photo, Jacob is seen lying in bed with Pamela, laughing, which shows he feels comfortable and at home with her. However, it's important to note that this relationship is not just familial. Pamela is also Jacob's psychotherapist. Jacob cared deeply for Calder and treated him like a son. He wanted to set a positive example for his godson of what a real man should be like. This approach seemed to work, as Jacob, who had struggled with mental illness for years, seemed to be stabilizing, joking frequently and always smiling. Unfortunately, this happiness did not last long. Over time, Pamela began to frequently express her frustrations with her ex-partner, Michael Weiss, Calder's father. Pamela ended her relationship with Michael shortly after the birth of her son. Michael Weiss, 38, is a psychotherapist. On the surface, he and Pamela appear to be a happy, loving couple. However, beneath the perfect exterior, their relationship is in trouble. Both Michael and Pamela have reported domestic violence to the police. Pamela once attacked Michael with a piece of broken glass. Michael received medical treatment, stitched up the wound, and later that day, he reported the incident to the police. As a result, Pamela was arrested and charged with assault. However, she was soon forgiven by Michael and the couple reconciled, but a few months later, Pamela went to the police again, claiming that Michael had threatened her and wanted to kill her. She later retracted that statement. Although they were never officially married, Michael and Pamela's relationship lasted about 4 years. After they had a son in 2008, Pamela finally ended the relationship. Their tumultuous relationship ended. But a new conflict arose. The custody battle for their son, Calder. Every day, Pamela tells Jacob about Michael in insulting words. She complained that Michael refused to pay child support and even accused him of doing bad things to their son, Calder, during his visits. On the morning of November 12, 2012, Jacob was awakened by Pamela's gentle touch. She climbed into his bed, caressed his back, and whispered sweet nothings in his ear. She told him that Jacob was her savior. He was the best person in the world because no one understood her like he did. However, her affectionate mood quickly changed. She took a black sports bag from her closet and stuffed it with a long-handled hammer and a kitchen knife. Overwhelmed with emotion, she began to cry and told Jacob that today was the day he needed to face Michael. A diagram showing the entrance to the multi-story office building where Michael is seeing patients is written on a piece of paper. Jacob stands up, grabs his bag, stuffs the diagram into his pocket, and leaves. Before leaving, he washes his face and declares, "Today is the day our lives will change for the better because Michael will be eliminated." Jacob arrived at the right high-rise in Manhattan. He circled the building, observing it from different angles. Entering through the service entrance, he checked in on the first floor, provided his real name, and mentioned he was going to the tutoring center. He was allowed inside. Jacob took the elevator to the 12th floor and made his way to Michael's office. He heard a patient inside and decided to wait in the hallway for the appointment to finish. Soon, the patient would exit, leaving Michael alone. While waiting, Jacob felt increasingly anxious. Doubts flooded his mind, making him question whether he was making the right decisions. At one point, he thought about abandoning everything and running home. However, the idea of returning to Pamela without completing her request and disappointing her was stronger than his fear. Jacob realized he had no choice but to continue. After the patient left, Jacob entered the office and informed Michael that Pamela had asked him to collect financial documents for the Calder's kindergarten. As Michael searched for the documents, Jacob asked to use the restroom. In the restroom, Jacob took out a knife and hid it in his pocket, then retrieved a large hammer. He exited the bathroom and approached Michael, swinging the hammer at him. Thankfully, Michael reacted quickly, ducking just in time to avoid a serious injury, though the hammer struck his shoulder. Jacob then pulled out the knife, and a struggle ensued. Michael, being physically larger, quickly fought back. The people around heard Michael's cry for help. They mistakenly thought that the doctor was being attacked by an unstable mental patient. They quickly called 911 to report the incident. Before the police arrived, Jacob and Michael, feeling exhausted, sat down in the hallway. Jacob took out his phone and took a selfie, which he sent to Pamela along with a question about what he should do next. But he never received a reply. The situation made him feel very strange. The police and ambulance arrived shortly after. The injured men were rushed to the hospital for treatment. Fortunately, none of them had life-threatening injuries. Michael was treated and sent home the same day. Jacob's injuries were more serious and the doctors noted that he was unstable. Jacob was arrested in the hospital while he was receiving treatment. He sent a detailed message to Pamela about what had happened to him and Michael. Although she initially ignored his message, she eventually asked which hospital he was in. When Pamela arrived, she was not allowed to see Jacob, who was already handcuffed to the bed. Jacob spent 4 days in the hospital before being taken to a jail cell after his discharge. He was released on bail of $200,000 while awaiting trial. Jacob was permitted to fly from New York to his parents' home in Florida. Several weeks after the incident, Michael filed a lawsuit against Pamela, accusing her of conspiring to kill him. Michael argued that Pamela was dangerous and insisted that their son should live with him. He presented surveillance footage from a hardware store showing that the day before the attack, Pamela and Jacob had purchased a hammer together and Pamela had paid in cash. Pamela denied any involvement, saying that she had only asked Jacob to retrieve some financial documents from Michael, but had not asked Jacob to attack. Although she admitted to giving Jacob a knife, she explained that it was to protect her son Calder, since Calder's daycare was on the first floor of the building where Michael worked. Shortly thereafter, the judge transferred custody of Calder to Michael Weiss, granting him full custody and banning Pamela from contacting her son for 5 years. A few months after the incident, Jacob accused Pamela of orchestrating the attack on Michael. He claimed that Pamela meticulously planned the attack and that she had instructed Jacob to approach Michael and hit him with a hammer. Jacob previously said that Pamela had been psychologically manipulating him. Pamela repeatedly told him that Michael was harming her son, but there was no evidence to support her claim. No one ever witnessed Michael harming Calder or saying anything negative to his son. In fact, relatives testified that Michael cared deeply for his son. Pamela was someone Jacob trusted completely and considered very close. Meanwhile, Jacob's parents were in despair. They fully supported their son and claimed that Pamela had brainwashed him using psychological techniques from her practice. In March 2016, Jacob Nolan's trial began. He claimed that Pamela had forced him to attack Michael Weiss. Prosecutors described Jacob as a spoiled child from a wealthy family, noting that he provided 3 inconsistent accounts of the event and appeared confused. When the police first arrived at Michael's office, Jacob pointed at Michael and accused him of attacking Jacob with a knife. However, during questioning, Jacob claimed that he had never used a hammer in Michael's office. He explained that he had brought the hammer for self-defense because he was afraid of Michael. In his third statement, Jacob said that Michael had attacked him first. Prosecutors presented a key piece of evidence regarding the motive behind the attack on Michael. Just before the attack, Michael had purchased a $1.5 million life insurance policy, naming his son Calder as the beneficiary. However, 3 days before the attack, on November 9, 2012, Michael had agreed to add Pamela as a co-beneficiary and allow her to manage Calder's money. Jacob claimed that this was the first time he had learned about the insurance policy and claimed that Pamela had never shared her financial affairs with him. During the trial, it was revealed that Jacob had purchased plastic zip ties from a hardware store in addition to the hammer found with Pamela. Jacob confirmed this and made a shocking admission. Pamela had asked him not only to kill Michael but also to ensure he suffered before dying. She described brutal acts that Jacob was supposed to carry out. Jacob refused to inflict such extreme cruelty. But he agreed to kill Michael. Jacob mentioned that Pamela initially wanted to create a homemade weapon using an air pistol, but when they got to the hardware store, they decided it would be easier and more effective to use a hammer instead. Jacob's attorney focused on proving that Jacob was insane. However, proving that he was insane is quite difficult. Currently, there is no test that can reveal a person's thoughts and feelings at the time of the crime. Evaluations are usually based on interviews, police reports, medical records, and sometimes social media messages. Often, 2 different psychiatrists can give conflicting opinions, which can confuse judges and juries. Although mental illness can affect emotions, thoughts, and behavior, throughout the trial, Jacob clearly understood his actions and admitted that they were wrong and bad. He did not appear insane in court. He was handsome, articulate, well-dressed, and answered questions clearly. Pamela was not called to testify at the trial by either the prosecution or the defense. Jacob Nolan, who had a mental disorder, faced skepticism regarding his claim that Pamela was the one who initiated the attack. Before the trial, Jacob's lawyers hired detectives to locate Pamela, but they were unable to find her, and her apartment was empty. In March 2016, after a 2-week trial, 24-year-old Jacob Nolan was convicted of attempted murder and second-degree assault, receiving a sentence of 9.5 years in prison. Jacob was very upset about his sentence, stating, "It's unfair. I'm not a danger to society." His parents regretted their decision to send him to live with their Pamela, believing it was their biggest mistake. On October 19, 2017, nearly 5 years after Michael's attack, police located Pamela in Sullivan, New York. The Manhattan District Attorney charged her with conspiracy to murder Michael Weiss. At the time of Pamela's arrest, police found her passport in Calder's birth certificate. Pamela was arrested and maintained her innocence. She hired 2 of New York's top attorneys, who claimed that the video showing her doing laundry and the video of her buying the hammer had been edited. They claimed that Pamela was a highly educated psychotherapist and would never have considered organizing a murder. In the 5 years after Jacob's attack, Pamela lived a normal life. She worked and rented an apartment. She did not attempt to go into hiding or flee the country, but she avoided reporters and did not comment on Jacob's crimes. Pamela was detained before her trial at the notorious Rikers Island prison in New York, where she spent 5 years due to legal issues. On September 7, 2022, during a pre-trial hearing, Pamela made a statement agreeing to plead guilty in return for a lighter sentence. However, a month later, she decided to withdraw her plea. Pamela's trial took place. The jury found Pamela Buchbinder guilty and she was sentenced to 11 years in prison. After the verdict was read, she looked sadly at her relative, who blew her kisses. Jacob and Pamela are currently serving their sentences in separate correctional facilities in New York. Jacob is scheduled to be released in 2024, while Pamela will be released in 2027. Jacob maintains regular phone contact with his parents. He has expressed remorse for his actions and reflects on them every night. He even wishes to meet Michael Weiss in person to apologize and seek forgiveness. When Pamela is released, her son, Calder, will be 19. He is currently being raised by his biological father, Michael, who still works in Manhattan. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Taylor Wright. Taylor Wright was born on April 23, 1988. Friends and family described her as energetic and full of life. She was kind and empathetic, spending most of her life in North Carolina as she pursued her American dream. Taylor married Jeff Wright and later had a son named Drake. She earned a college degree and worked as an officer at the local police station, where she solved numerous crimes and was respected. To the outside world, Taylor's life seemed perfect. She had a loving husband, a son, and a respected job. However, the reality was that not everything in her life was as idyllic as it appeared. Taylor's close friends knew that she smoked marijuana occasionally, but she kept it a secret. During her time in the police force, she used it to manage stress and her heavy workload. She claimed that she didn't smoke regularly, only occasionally to relax after a long day. However, Jeff found out about her secret and left with her son after their divorce. This made Taylor realize that she needed to change her life. In 2016, Taylor decided to start over and moved to Pensacola, Florida, a small resort town with a population of about 52,000. She likes the warm, comfortable atmosphere here. After quitting her job, she began working as a private investigator. Armed with the knowledge and experience from her previous job, she was eager to apply her skills to help her clients. Taylor divorced her husband, but faced 2 major challenges: child custody and financial issues. Court proceedings to divide assets and child custody were ongoing. It was a complicated divorce, and despite her efforts to reach an agreement, they were unable to reach an agreement, which dragged on. In September 2017, frustrated by financial disputes, Taylor withdrew money from her bank account without telling Jeff. The money, which was her personal savings, was something she did not want to share with Jeff. After withdrawing the money, she gave it to a friend to keep. one of Taylor's friends. Ashley MacArthur is the main character in this story. Taylor has known Ashley, a forensic scientist, for over a year. Although it was a relatively short period of time, they became very close, to the point where Taylor entrusted Ashley with a large sum of money. Ashley agreed to help and was supposed to deposit the money in a safe deposit box, keeping it a secret from Jeff until Taylor was ready to use it. However, she soon needed money to pay for a lawyer. When Taylor reached out to Ashley, she noticed that Ashley always had excuses for delaying the return of the money or only giving her small amounts. Ashley claimed she was having trouble withdrawing the funds or that there were issues with the bank. During this time, Taylor grew increasingly suspicious that something was wrong and worried that her money might have been spent. Despite Taylor's persistent requests for the full amount to be returned, Ashley continued to provide various excuses. On the evening of September 7, 2017, Taylor and her friend Cassandra Waller went out to dinner. Cassandra had quickly become close friends after Taylor moved to the area. Cassandra was new to the city and Taylor suggested they rent an apartment together. Cassandra, a kind teacher, agreed. Over time, they developed a strong friendship. During dinner, Taylor shared her financial concerns, especially about her friend Ashley, who she believed was intentionally delaying repayment of money. Taylor expressed concern that Ashley might have spent the money or not want to pay it back. This made Taylor very anxious and stressed because she desperately needed the money to hire a good lawyer. That evening, Cassandra comforted Taylor, reassuring her that the matter would eventually be resolved, although she also had doubts about whether the money was still there. Taylor mentioned that she had scheduled a meeting with Ashley the next day, September 8th, to go to the bank together. On the morning of September 8th, as Cassandra was getting ready for work, she said goodbye to Taylor. And on her way out of the house, she saw Ashley's sitting car in the driveway. They were finally ready to take care of their banking issues. The girls said goodbye, and Cassandra drove off to school. Later that day, Ashley called Cassandra to inform her that she and Taylor had decided not to go to the bank, opting instead to go to the farm. This confused Cassandra, as she knew Taylor was in dire need of money. The night before, Taylor had been very stressed and emotional at dinner, eager to get her financial situation sorted out. Ashley explained that she and Taylor had been discussing Taylor's struggles. Ashley suggested that horseback riding might help Taylor improve spirit, therefore them to cancel their bank trip and plan an alternative vacation. This explanation seemed strange to Cassandra, but she wished them luck anyway. However, after the call, Cassandra attempted to contact Taylor but received no response to her calls or messages. Later on, Cassandra received a text from Taylor, who said she couldn't talk at the moment but would call back later. Taylor explained that she was feeling uncertain and depressed due to her divorce and the changes in her life, and that she was going out of town for a few days. Cassandra believed her and decided to give her friend some space. A couple of days later, Cassandra reached out again, asking Taylor to return home as soon as she could. After that, she received no response. As the days passed, Cassandra tried to contact Taylor several times, but Taylor continued to ignore her calls and texts, even though some of the messages were marked as read. Taylor did not return home, and all of her belongings were still intact, which made Cassandra increasingly worried about her friend's safety. Cassandra wanted to see Taylor to make sure she was okay. Their neighbor said that Taylor had used drugs in the past and that she could become withdrawn during difficult times. With the difficulties Taylor was having, Cassandra was worried that she might relapse. Cassandra was feeling anxious. A week had gone by with no news, and waiting seemed pointless. Concerned, her reached out to the police. She told the officers that something was off, as Taylor was behaving unusually and had completely disappeared without explanation. In their shared apartment, there were numerous personal items belonging to Taylor that she would have taken if she had moved. There was no valid reason for her to ignore her friends' calls. Until now, Taylor had never done anything like this. After hearing Cassandra's story, the police took note of the unusual aspects of the case. The police focused on the time frame of her disappearance. Naturally, they interviewed Cassandra first, since she lived in the same house as Taylor and had a close relationship with her. Meanwhile, searches were conducted in the apartment that Cassandra shared with Taylor. In the apartment, the police found Taylor's identification, some cash, and an unloaded revolver. Cassandra explained that they kept weapons in the house for self-defense, but they had never used them. There was nothing else suspicious found, but it was evident that Taylor could not have left for an extended period without her documents, money, and belongings. Cassandra was questioned several times, and she quickly felt that the police suspected her and shifted their focus to proving her innocence. Despite this, she continued to cooperate with the investigation because she wanted to find out the truth. Eventually, she was ruled out as a suspect. Police initially focused on Jeff, given their contentious divorce, which involved the division of assets and custody of their son. Jeff certainly had a strong motive to harm Taylor, but police quickly determined that he was in North Carolina at the time of her disappearance and had not left the city. He had recently remarried and was focused on building a new life, with little regard for his ex-wife. Family members confirmed that despite their divorce, Jeff and Taylor remained on good terms for the sake of their 6-year-old son. Jeff was known to be non-confrontational and had never harmed Taylor. He was not even aware that she had withdrawn money and tried to conceal it. Therefore, there was no reason for him to be angry with her, prompting police to immediately eliminate him as a potential suspect. The police then decide to talk to Ashley, whom Cassandra had mentioned. Her behavior is very unusual. They bring her in for questioning, and the police quickly notice that she is even flirting with the police, which shows that she is not at all concerned about her friend's disappearance. Ashley seems to believe that Taylor is okay. She knows that Taylor has been addicted to marijuana in the past and thinks that Taylor is not really missing but is simply indulging her addiction. Ashley speculates that after receiving some money, Taylor relapsed and went off to use. However, this explanation seems unconvincing because Ashley had previously told Cassandra about the trip to the farm, but she didn't mention that. Only when the police press her does Ashley reveal that they went to the farm because Taylor wanted to relax. During the trip, Taylor confided in her about the stress she was under from the divorce proceedings, which had affected her mental health. After some time, Taylor expressed that she was tired and wanted to go home. She called an Uber and left. Ashley reported that she hadn't seen or heard from Taylor, despite making several attempts to call her. The police were aware of a money issue that Ashley was supposed to resolve but was avoiding, leading them to suspect she was hiding something. Suddenly, Ashley started mentioning a safe deposit box and money, claiming she had no knowledge of the funds being talked about. At this point, the police were confused as there was no clear information regarding the money. Police then decided to look into text messages between her and Taylor. They discovered numerous discussions about money, with Ashley frequently postponing meetings and transferring money. In the text messages, they talked about going to the bank on September 8th to withdraw money. Police requested footage from cameras near Taylor's home. After reviewing the videos, they found the women near Taylor's apartment, which matched Cassandra's earlier account. Ashley was in a car in front of the house when Cassandra left. Taylor then left the house and left with Ashley. Using geolocation, police tracked Taylor and Ashley's movements. Police reviewed surveillance footage from across the city and saw them buying beer and food, which appeared to be normal. However, no further information about their whereabouts was available after that. Inconsistencies began to appear between Ashley's testimony. However, the police decided to release her because they did not have enough evidence against her at that time. After that, Ashley contacted the police station almost daily to check on the progress of the investigation and to see if they had any new information. She wanted to help and often recounted the details of that day, as well as places where Taylor might have gone. During the conversation, she suggested that police should search alleys and talk to people who are selling illegal substances. She believed that Taylor was simply depressed and using drugs uncontrollably, and she repeatedly urged the police to follow up on this lead. She also talked about some suspicious suspects that she had seen with Taylor. Despite Ashley's best efforts to appear concerned, but police are still investigating her connection to Taylor's disappearance. Video evidence shows that Ashley visited the bank after Taylor went missing. During that visit, she withdrew money from Taylor's card. Police are particularly concerned about any potential conflict between Ashley and Taylor. Ashley had a strong motive for her actions, the $34,000 in question. It is suspected that she deliberately delayed her response because she did not want to return the money. Fearing that Taylor might report this to the police, Ashley may have decided to eliminate her friend. With Taylor missing for such a long time, there are concerns that she is no longer alive, but this needs to be confirmed. Ashley had a significant advantage. She worked for the police department and was married to a former deputy chief of the Battery Falcons. This created a difficult situation for the officers, who could not be sure of their safety while investigating her. As a result, they chose to keep the investigation secret. In October, Ashley was called in for questioning again. As the case progressed, documentary and circumstantial evidence accumulated that linked her to Taylor's disappearance. The police noticed a marked change in Ashley's behavior. She went from being outgoing and flirtatious to being withdrawn and clearly anxious. By this time, the police had verified that most of her previous statements were lies. They presented her with clear contradictions in her testimony and began investigating the cashing of hidden checks, which were likely to have forged signatures. At the very least, this could lead to accusations of fraud, but there could be darker motives behind these actions. Ashley initially claimed that she and Taylor had gone to East Milton, where they allegedly spent the day at a farm with animals. They were last seen on surveillance footage at 11:45 a.m., which was the only footage of Taylor alive during her initial interview. She was recorded on surveillance cameras in various locations throughout the day, but she was seen alone. As the police continued to talk to Ashley, she became increasingly nervous. Her answers became more confused, and she struggled to explain the discrepancies in her story. The police obtained a search warrant for the farmhouse but found no evidence in the large area. They then asked about the checks to determine if they were indeed counterfeit. If the checks were genuine, that would mean that Taylor was still alive when Ashley went to the bank, but Ashley could not give a clear answer. She just said that the checks could be real. While examining the geolocation data on Ashley's cell phone, police discovered that she had been staying at Britt Road for an extended period of time. This was another farm owned by her family. In fact, they had been there for several hours before Taylor disappeared. Ashley again confirmed that Taylor was going to buy a truck from a dealership. But this time, she added new details to the story. She said that Taylor was going back to the farm. Ashley had not mentioned these details in her earlier statements, claiming that Taylor had asked her to keep the incident private. Ashley believed that Taylor was still alive and would come back, so she did not want to harm her reputation in front of the police. However, she lied multiple times, leading the police to lose trust in her. The police were very interested in the Ashley family farm in Britt Road. It was a large, isolated area that would have been a fit place to commit the crime and cover it up. During their questioning, the police noted another strange aspect of Ashley's behavior: why she did not contact the police immediately when Taylor promised to return but did not show up. It was clear that Taylor was in trouble and needed help. Although Ashley tried to show concern to the police, she made no effort to find Taylor. Why did she wait until she was called in for questioning to show concern? These questions remain unanswered, but the police believe that Ashley was withholding important information. After her trip to the farm with Taylor, Ashley frequently called the police station to check on the investigation into her friend's disappearance, especially after her initial interview. She was anxious to know if she was being considered a suspect. After her conversation with the police, Ashley realized that she was the prime suspect in the case. She decided to ask for a lawyer, which ended her visit to the police station. On the morning of October 19, 2017, Ashley returned home. That afternoon, police obtained a search warrant for the farm where she and Taylor had been staying. Specially trained dogs were deployed in the search, and within 2 hours, they discovered a suspicious burial site. It was a small pit that appeared to have been recently dug and had been covered with concrete. A human skull was found in a shallow grave, along with other remains that had been hastily buried in the dirt and construction debris. The victim died from a gunshot wound to the head. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the body could not be identified at the scene. However, based on clothing and jewelry, it is believed that it was Taylor. An autopsy confirmed that the body was Taylor Wright, 30. The identification was completed using dental records and DNA analysis. Ashley was arrested that evening, October 19, 2018, and charged with premeditated murder. Ashley's defense attorney believed in her innocence, but the abundance of circumstantial evidence made it challenging to convince the jury of her non-involvement in the crime. The attorney focused on Ashley's psychological profile, portraying her as sweet, pretty, and a police officer, which seemed inconsistent with being a violent criminal. Friends and family described Ashley as quiet, modest, and incapable of murder, especially when considering her physical attributes. In contrast, Taylor was physically stronger, leading the prosecution to question the defense's arguments. The lawyer developed his strategy based on the fact that the police lacked direct evidence to prove Ashley's guilt. There was no murder weapon, no witnesses, and no DNA linking Ashley to the body. This made it difficult for the prosecutor's office to connect Ashley to the crime. One witness was the victim's ex-husband, Jeff. He stated that he reached out to Ashley a few days after his Taylor went missing, trying to locate her to address some matters related to their marriage and divorce. Jeff contacted Ashley via social media. She claimed that the last time she saw Taylor was when she was exchanging money. She expressed concern about whether Taylor had arrived safely. This was a new detail that Ashley had never mentioned before, leading the police to realize that she was a pathological liar who had deceived everyone around her. Although Jeff was initially investigated and cleared as a suspect due to a solid alibi, he still had a strong motive. The lawyer attempted to redirect the jury's attention to Jeff's possible involvement in his ex-wife's murder. But these efforts were unsuccessful. The testimonies from Ashley's close friends greatly influenced the jury. They revealed that the Ashley was not as she seemed. She frequently visited a strip club. Bartenders and staff stated that just before Taylor went missing, Ashley spoke negatively about Taylor. Later, a gun associated with Taylor's death was discovered in Ashley's house. After new evidence emerged, the Ashley admitted to spiking Taylor's beer with a strong substance. However, when Taylor took a sip, she noticed the drink tasted odd and clearly spoiled. She spat it out and refused to drink any more, which likely led to the failure of Ashley's poisoning plan. Despite this admission, Ashley denied any involvement in the shooting of her friend. The prosecution argued that she had a strong motive. Ashley was holding on to a large sum of Taylor's money and was delaying returning it. Taylor desperately needed the money to pay her lawyer, so if Ashley delayed paying, Taylor would likely report the matter to the police. This situation gave Ashley a motive to get rid of her friend. The police later discovered the reason for the delay in returning the money. Ashley had been secretly having an affair with a man named Brandon, without her husband's knowledge. It was revealed that she had spent all of the money on Brandon, including giving him a motorcycle just weeks before Taylor went missing. This coincided with the time she had received money from Taylor. In court, Brandon admitted that Ashley had frequently given him expensive gifts, but he did not know where she got the money, as she had no other source for such a large sum of money. The police tracked Ashley's movements and discovered that she had gone to Home Depot after Taylor went missing. The police spoke to a sales clerk who confirmed that Ashley had purchased several bags of quick-drying solution. When the substance found in Taylor's grave was tested, it matched the quick-drying compound mentioned by the hardware store employee. This suggests that Ashley attempted to quickly hide Taylor's body on the farm to avoid detection. However, Ashley's attorney argued that she was not physically able to carry the heavy bags, dig the grave, and move Taylor's body. The jury then deliberated for about 4 hours and found Ashley MacArthur guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, eligible for parole after 25 years. She also served an additional 7 years for fraud related to Taylor Wright's finances. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Angela Wilder. Angela Wilder was born in 1985 in San Diego, California, USA, as the youngest daughter in her family. She had an older sister named Cree, and they were very close. Both of her parents were in the military, so the family often moved. This often leads to tension within their families. Eventually, Angela's parents decided to divorce while she was still in school. Angela's mother met someone new, and they moved with him to Phoenix City, Alabama, a small town with a population of 40,000. After the move, her mother left the military. The family became regular attendees of the local church, as they had always been religious. In high school, Angela met Christopher Jackson, and they quickly developed feelings for each other. They began dating, marking Angela's first love. However, the relationship was short-lived because Angela prioritized her education. She needed to move to attend the University of South Alabama. Christopher found the breakup difficult as he genuinely loved Angela, but he didn't want to stand in the way of her dreams. In 2004, Angela met a preacher's son named Daniel. At that time, she was still in university but quickly became involved in a relationship with him. Before long, Angela became pregnant, and the couple decided to marry. They had a wedding and soon welcomed a daughter. However, financial struggles and work stress took a toll on their relationship. Angela's feelings for Daniel faded quickly, and she realized he wasn't the partner she wanted for life. After 2 years of marriage, Angela decided to file for divorce and seek full custody of their daughter. After graduating from university, Angela returned to her hometown and lived in her parents' house. Her mother and sister supported her by helping take care of her daughter. During one visit to the local church, she met Richie Wilder, a former schoolmate. Richie has a hot temper and often causes trouble. Many people believe that the reason is because he was raised in an unhappy family. His father was an alcoholic who often mistreated his mother, who couldn't do anything about it. While many people avoided Richie, Angela believed she saw a different side of him and thought she could bring out his best qualities. Richie and Angela formed a close relationship and they started dating. Angela mentioned that Richie got along well with her daughter and treated her kindly. However, Angela's relatives quickly observed negative changes in her behavior at the start of her relationship with Richie. They noticed that Angela became quieter, more difficult to understand, and more stressed. Despite everyone's worry and advice to keep her distance from him, but Angela did not heed their warnings. In January 2009, Richie and Angela got married. Richie took Angela and her daughter to the family home, and they moved to the city of Minot, North Dakota. It's a small town with about 40,000 people, a very tight-knit local community, and includes armed forces facilities. There is also a military base where Richie was stationed. In 2010, Angela found out she was pregnant. During that time, she started working at a supply store on the military base. Some people close to Richie and Angela noticed issues in their relationship. Angela's coworkers noticed that Richie was often rude and aggressive towards her. He often insults Angela and makes her cry, even though she is very vulnerable. She later revealed that he was not only cruel to her but also to her daughter. It was discovered that he regularly abused the whole family but did so without leaving any marks. This abuse continued for years. The couple had 2 children, a boy and a girl. When Angela reached her breaking point, she officially reported the violence to the police. When the investigation started, all of Richie's colleagues and the military base management supported him. He convinced people that his wife, Angela, was unstable and had mental health issues. Angela lacked solid evidence of her husband's mistreatment, and the backing Richie received from the military base management helped cover up the case. Despite this, Angela was determined to end the relationship while keeping custody of their children. While trying to prove Richie was cruel, Angela herself faced accusations from him. Richie alleged that Angela had anger management issues, and he proved it thanks to the support of his colleagues. Ultimately, Angela, a mother of 2, was referred to an anger management specialist and prescribed sedatives. Friends familiar with Angela insisted she never had such issues, and no one had seen her act aggressively. They believed Richie orchestrated the situation to discredit her with the authorities. However, Angela still followed the treatment regimen, with the aim of understanding and dealing with her condition. Around 2 weeks after, Richie and Angela reconciled, but peace in their relationship was short-lived. Angela soon filed for divorce, and their marriage ended in May 2012. Richie faced a military tribunal. Despite opposition from the officers at the military base, Angela succeeded in proving the violence against her and the children. Due to uncovered family issues and deceit, Richie was dismissed from service. Angela did not want to share custody and planned to move with the children back to Alabama. This decision angered Richie. He wanted to maintain a relationship with the children, visit them regularly, and have them over on weekends. This disagreement led to frequent arguments between the ex-spouses. Richie consistently opposed the idea and even threatened Angela. During the World Cup, Angela confided her plan to her loved ones, and despite opposition, she went through with her decision and moved to another state. Besides, Richie also relocated to a nearby city within the state and began working as a junior staff member at a hospital. In this new city, he met Cynthia Becker, a kindergarten teacher. They began dating, and their relationship quickly progressed. Eventually, they got married and started a family. Despite this, Richie remained troubled by the custody arrangement of his children, as his ex-wife, Angela, had been granted full custody. He maintained contact with his son and daughter primarily through phone calls, but the disputes between them persisted. Despite everything that happened, Angela seemed genuinely happy. She had started dating Christopher Jackson again, her first boyfriend from high school. Previously, they had broken up so she could pursue her education. After many years of separation, the love between them burned stronger than ever. Angela told her family that she had finally found someone with whom she felt warmth, and they had a son. Angela and Christopher were planning their wedding, and she was pregnant again. She had no idea she would soon have to fight for her life. On the evening of November 13, 2015, Christopher went to work for his night shift at a local 24-hour Walmart. He didn't have a car, so Angela usually picked him up after his shift at 7 a.m. However, on that night, Angela stopped responding to his calls and messages. They typically stayed in touch during his shifts. But communication ended around 3 a.m. when Angela texted that she heard a noise outside and felt she was being followed. Christopher only saw the message 2 hours later because he was busy with work. Concerned, he tried calling Angela, but she didn't answer. He assumed she might have fallen asleep or gone to a clinic in the morning for pregnancy tests. But when Angela didn't arrive to pick him up as planned, Christopher began to worry then. At the time, Angela was enrolled in a nursing program at Minot University and had recently discovered she was pregnant again. Christopher thought she might have gone to the hospital if she felt unwell or if their son was sick, which might explain why she wasn't responding to his calls and messages. Even though he understood her possible situation, the strangeness didn't stop there. Normally, she would immediately call Christopher in such a case. If he didn't answer, she will at least send a text message to inform him of any problems. So, he was confused about why Angela suddenly stopped all communication, which was not like her. Christopher kept calling, but his calls always went to voicemail. Too worried, he rushed back home, then he knocked on the bedroom window where Angela might be sleeping. However, when he saw the back door, he realized something terrible might have happened that night. There were signs of a break-in, as if the door had been forcefully knocked down. Christopher looked inside and called Angela's name several times, but there was no response. He didn't enter the house, fearing something bad might be inside. Instead, he immediately called 911 to report the situation. He explained that Angela hadn't answered his phone for several hours and didn't pick him up from work as usual. He asked the dispatcher if he could go inside to find out what happened, but the dispatcher advised against it, suggesting there might be a criminal inside waiting for another victim. Christopher was instructed to wait outside for the police. He urged them to hurry because Angela was pregnant, and he was concerned for her and their unborn child's safety. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. During this time, Christopher waited outside for them. He could only enter the house once they arrived. From the outside, everything appeared normal, the furniture was in place, and everything was clean and tidy. However, Angela still did not respond to his calls. When the officers approached the main bedroom and opened the door, the reason for Angela's silence became clear. One officer turned on the light and discovered a horrifying scene. There was so much blood that the bed linen items were all mixed into a red mess. On the bed lay 30-year-old Angela, showing no signs of life. She was stabbed multiple times. During the attack, Angela's 2-year-old son was in the house. He remained silent, and no sounds came from his room. Christopher, alarmed, rushed to check on him, but thankfully, he was just sleeping and unharmed, as he was not the killer's target. The other children were with their grandmother that day. Christopher immediately accused Richie of being the one who killed Angela, having no other suspects for who could have harmed Angela so brutally. She had no other enemies. After marrying Richie, Angela had a daughter and a son, who were 10 and 4 years old at the time of the tragedy. Although the judge awarded Angela full custody, but Richie had visitation rights and to be involved in their children's lives. Richie took the kids away for the weekend and intended to contest custody so they could live with him forever. Angela opposed this due to his cruel nature, leading to constant arguments between them. Later, there is evidence that Richie may have been involved in the murder of his ex-wife, Angela. For example, Crystal, Angela's sister, informed the police that Richie had aggressively entered Angela's house after their divorce and said that if he wanted, he could reach her. However, Richie never used physical force in public, so these claims remained unproven. The forensic expert concluded that by the time Angela was found, she had been killed with over 1,000 stab wounds. She had fought desperately against the attack, as evidenced by the cuts on her hands, likely from trying to defend herself. The police quickly observed that valuables in the house were still intact, indicating that the attacker was not motivated by theft but by a desire to kill Angela. Investigating her personal life, the police noted that Angela and Richie had a hostile relationship and were frequently in conflict. Richie had been discharged from military service for violence against Angela and their children. Relatives of Angela confirmed that the relationship between her and Richie was very strained. Angela avoided interacting with Richie when he came to pick up the children, so Christopher usually handled the exchanges. Christopher detailed the issues between Angela and Richie, expressing his dislike for Richie's aggressive behavior, although he managed to avoid direct conflicts with him. After gathering all the information, the detectives focused on Richie, who became the main suspect. Richie agreed to speak with them and firmly denied any involvement in the incident. Since the evidence collected had not yet been analyzed, they had nothing to confront him with, so they continued questioning him. Richie provided an alibi, stating that he left work around 7 p.m. and went home. His new wife, Cynthia, confirmed that Richie was with her at home the entire night. However, the investigators noticed several wounds on Richie's hands and face that resembled scratches, which could be defensive wounds inflicted by Angela during a struggle. Richie claimed these injuries were from playing with a child. The detectives doubted his explanation and decided to review CCTV footage from the area, requesting the recordings. After reviewing the footage from the cameras that might have captured the criminal arriving to commit the murder, Richie's car was not seen. However, this didn't mean much as the attacker could have gone unnoticed. The police collected DNA samples from Richie for testing and obtained a warrant to search his car. The car's interior was extremely clean, except for a small red stain on the front passenger seat door. Forensic experts collected these materials for examination. Suspicions about Richie increased. He was asked to take a polygraph test. Although a polygraph is not admissible in court, detectives wanted to observe his reaction and behavior during the test. Initially, Richie agreed, but he never showed up for it. Despite his refusal, this was insufficient to arrest him or press charges, so investigators decided to look into his background more thoroughly. All the employees at the hospital where Richie works were aware of the investigation. Despite this, he was fired a few weeks after the investigation started. A complaint was filed against him for he pushing an elderly patient. Richie later justified his actions by claiming nervous tension caused by pressure from police officers. Meanwhile, detectives were gathering more evidence of the Richie's involvement in Angela's murder. DNA traces were found that matched samples from the suspected killer. Richie, suggesting that he was the one Angela had fought off in her bedroom. Richie declared that maybe the recently time he picked up the kids he accidentally left a trace of DNA there. However, this explanation seemed implausible since the last meeting was with Christopher, and he and Angela had no contact with each other. The examination confirmed that the drop of blood in Richie's car belonged to Angela's. Richie claimed it might have been from when they were still together, as Angela allegedly had blood pressure issues and occasionally had nosebleeds. However, the blood appeared very fresh. His explanation seemed like attempts to mislead the investigation, revealed many contradictions in his testimony. The police finally arrested Richie for Angela's murder, but he denied all the charges. In March, the police received an unexpected confession from Richie. He mentioned that he had no criminal record and a good background, claiming he wasn't guilty of the crime. However, he was willing to talk about who was actually involved in Angela's death. According to him, during one of their meetings, Christopher proposed an unusual deal. Richie recounted that Christopher suspected Angela of cheating and was convinced she was seeing her lover while he worked night shifts. Christopher suggested catching Angela in the act, which would also give Richie leverage in a custody battle for the children. Richie agreed, and that evening, he called Christopher to pick him up from work. Richie explained that he and Christopher went to Angela's house to confront her and her lover. When they entered the bedroom, they only found Angela, who was sleeping peacefully. Despite this, Christopher unexpectedly drew a knife they had brought for self-defense and attacked her, stabbing her multiple times. Angela woke up and tried to defend herself, but she couldn't. Richie confessed that he was in shock, but he unable to help her. Richie watched the attack, but was too stunned and unable to intervene. Afterward, Christopher warned him not to tell anyone, threatening to kill him if he did. Once Richie regained his senses, he checked Angela's pulse by touching her neck. Suddenly, Angela made a final attempt to fight back, grabbing him with her hands and scratching him before collapsing once more. Terrified by Christopher's warning, fled the scene and remained silent until the situation directly affected him. Richie said he did not tell this story during his first meeting with the police because he was scared. He stated that Christopher kept threatening him and his family, but no one believed this claim Richie's. The police reviewed the store's surveillance footage and confirmed that Christopher was working the night shift during Angela's death. He was on Marta Street, visible to cameras from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., and couldn't leave his job. Moreover, Christopher confirmed that he took a taxi home in the morning, and this information was recorded on his mobile phone. Once Richie realized how absurd his story sounded, he began telling more incredible tales. He finally claimed to have witnessed Angela being murdered by a killer wearing a black mask, allegedly hired by an enemy of Angela. He even tried to accuse some of his fellow inmates of attacking Angela, but he couldn't clearly explain the incident of that night. He claimed the killers were overwhelmed with guilt and confessed to him during a private conversation. However, all of this turned out to be fabricated. It was revealed that Richie even paid $500,000 to a prisoner to plead guilty on his behalf. When no one agreed to take the blame, Richie attempted to pay a similar amount to arrange for the murder of Christopher to keep him silent. Fortunately, his fellow inmate ignored this offer. One night, while Richie was in custody awaiting trial, correctional officers noticed him acting suspiciously. After searching his cell, they found a broom handle sharpened on one end like a spear. It was clear he was planning an escape and had made a weapon for this purpose. Fortunately, the plan was discovered in time, and the guards began to watch him more closely. As a result, he was never able to carry out any of his plans. Richie's behavior in prison was considered during his trial, and in addition to the murder charges, he faced punishment for attempting to escape. The trial for Angela Wilder's murder began in December 2016. Despite having enough evidence to convict Richie, forensic experts presented the accusations. Angela's body was found on the morning of November 14, 2015. She was lying face up on the bed, covered in blood. A drop of blood found in Richie's car matched the DNA of Angela. Additionally, DNA under her fingernails matched Richie's, providing irrefutable evidence of his guilt. Although Richie's lawyer tried his best to defend his client, the case documents provided by the prosecutor's office were too convincing. Consequently, the jury found Richie Wilder guilty of premeditated murder. A woman who knew Richie well insisted from the start that the police had made a mistake. She argued that they only focused on Richie due to past conflicts, overlooking other possibilities. She maintained that Richie couldn't be guilty because he had spent the night with her from November 13th to 14th. She believes that he is a trustworthy person who loves children and does not commit domestic violence. However, evidence clearly confirmed his guilt. Richie Wilder received a life sentence in prison without the chance of parole and an extra 5 years for trying to escape. Overnight, Angela's children lost both parents. Richie's new wife, Cynthia, who had hoped for a happy family, could no longer be with her husband. After the trial, Cynthia expressed her disbelief, considering it an injustice. She insisted that Richie was wrongly framed and imprisoned. The case might have ended there, but a friend of Cynthia's kept an eye out. Cynthia frequently talked to this friend after Richie was imprisoned, often steering the conversation towards Angela's murder and the prison situation. During one discussion, Cynthia mentioned that Angela was supposed to be shot with a gun her husband had. But he changed his mind and used a knife instead. This raised suspicions for Cynthia's friend. It seemed that Cynthia felt no pity at all, and at the same time she knew more than she was letting on about the murder. The police asked this friend of Cynthia's to let them wiretap his chat meeting next with Cynthia, and he agreed. Later, during a heartfelt conversation, he asked why Cynthia was so upset about the crime involving Angela. She clarified that it wasn't the crime itself that bothered her, but the fact that Richie was caught and imprisoned. Cynthia expressed frustration that Richie should have taken more drastic actions like cutting off Angela's fingers, burning down her house, or destroying all evidence to avoid arrest. Cynthia was also angry about a drop of blood the police found inside Richie's car. She confessed that they had worked together to clean up the traces. Cynthia often discusses the importance of committing crimes perfectly, so as to never get caught by the police. Cynthia admitted that the murder of Angela had been planned by both she and Richie for a long time. Richie did not want to share custody of the children with Angela's and saw the crime as the only solution. Cynthia helped him plan it but did not participate in the attack itself. Later, this recording was given to the police. Cynthia was arrested in 2018, and the trial began. She claimed that everything on the recording was a lie and that she was set up. According to Angela, she wanted to impress a friend because she hoped to start a relationship with him, so she thought this story would make a strong impression. Law enforcement officials stated that Cynthia was the only person who knew the situation and had the ability to prevent the murder, but she chose not to act. The prosecutor's office offered Cynthia's a plea deal for a reduced sentence of 25 years, which she declined. She believed she could avoid responsibility due to the lack of evidence apart from a confession. She maintained her innocence regarding. However, a recording revealed that Cynthia actively participated in planning and preparing for the massacre. She also assisted in disposing of evidence, overseeing the murder, and even attempted to help Richie escape from prison in 2016. Authorities documented these activities and planned to file new charges against her. Cynthia was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and attempting to escape, resulting in a life sentence without parole, similar to Richie, who was already serving a sentence. Both Richie and Cynthia appealed their convictions, but their appeals were denied. After the trials, Angela's mother became the legal guardian of the children. The children moved to Jacksonville, Florida, to live with her in September 2017. The court initially ruled that Richie could not have contact with his children. However, this decision was later revised, allowing the children to decide on contact once they reach adulthood. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Maria Katabi. In 2003, Dr. Paul Jarrett was 82 years old. Despite his age, he remained strong and healthy. He was a respected psychiatry professor, well known in the area. From a young age, he aspired to succeed in this field. He pursued education, secured a job at a clinic, and eventually, after gaining experience, opened his own practice. His successful career allowed him to buy his dream house and enjoy a comfortable life for many years. Paul lived there with his wife and their 4 children, Paul Jr., Greg, Aletta, and Mark. Together, they built a happy life into their later years. In 2002, the family faced a tragedy when his beloved wife passed away. It was a significant loss for Paul, but he persevered. He planned to continue working at his clinic as long as he was able. His calm and balanced personality drew people to him. By 2003, Paul was still running his private practice and had a close relationship with his youngest son, Greg. Greg visits and takes care of him often. They go fishing and run marathons together. Greg followed in his father's footsteps and became a doctor. He was working at a hospital in Miami while also pursuing further medical education. Before he moved to live with his father, Greg married his assistant at the clinic, and they had a child together. However, his marriage did not last. A few years after their child's birth, he divorced his wife and returned to care for his father, who required support and attention. Although Greg's father was cheerful and desired an active life, he needed assistance in his old age, and Greg was willing to help him. On July 16, 2003, Greg did not show up for work. He was expected at the hospital by 7 a.m. to work until 3:30 p.m., but even by 7:30 a.m., he still hadn't arrived. This concerned his colleagues since he was known for his punctuality and responsibility. They attempted to contact him by phone, but he did not answer. At that time, Greg was dating a nurse named Monica. His colleagues reached out to her to find out about Greg's whereabouts, but she informed them that she had not seen him since the previous evening when he left to go home and take care of his father. They attempted to call Paul, the father of the missing doctor, but he didn't answer his phone. Next, they contacted the Paul workplace, where his assistant informed them that Paul hadn't shown up there either. She didn't know his whereabouts and mentioned that her calls to him were also unanswered. This situation was increasingly worrying. Concerned, Monica decided to visit Paul's home to investigate further, fearing that, given his age, he might have had an accident and could require assistance. When she got to the house, she immediately saw that Paul's car was gone from the driveway. There were no other signs of alarm. She knocked on the door, but it was locked. Monica walked inside. The house was messy and quiet. Feeling uneasy and afraid that there might be a robber inside, she did not dare to go any further. She called 911 to report Paul missing. The dispatcher found the situation suspicious, suspecting that a crime might be committed. Monica agreed and decided to wait for the police to arrive. When the officers arrived, they made a horrifying discovery. Inside, they found Paul Jarrett lying lifeless on the floor, having been shot in the head. There were no signs of a struggle, suggesting he was likely shot while asleep and died instantly. During their initial inspection, officers noticed black spots around the gunshot wounds and on the bed linen, indicating traces of gunpowder gases that had burned his skin. It was clear that the attacker was very close to Paul when he was shot. In the next room, Greg was found, and his death was far from peaceful. The noise of the shooting likely woke him up. He got up to investigate and encountered the attacker. There were probably 2 criminals involved. Greg was shot 4 times. He attempted to defend himself, first attacking the shooter but was immediately wounded in the arms. Realizing he was outmatched, he tried to escape, prompting the criminal to shoot wildly. The police found several bullet holes in the walls. Furniture in the rooms was overturned, and items from shelves were scattered on the floor. At first glance, it appeared to be a robbery gone wrong. Typically, thieves target houses when the owners are absent, but sometimes they encounter them. If the criminals have a weapon, they might use it to eliminate unwanted witnesses. However, in this case, the victims were intentionally targeted. Paul was clearly killed in his sleep and never saw the criminals' faces, posing no threat to them. Greg was also asleep during the invasion, and if the intruders hadn't made noise with gunfire, he wouldn't have been a problem for them. Robbers do not usually act this way. They only open fire if the homeowner spots them during the robbery and recognizes them. The police soon realized that the attackers had come with the intention of killing, and that the rearrangement of the furniture was just a setup to throw the investigation off track. Furthermore, the locks showed no signs of damage, suggesting that the perpetrator knew the victims, either breaking into the house or being let in voluntarily. The presence of numerous visible valuables and cash left untouched in the house suggested it wasn't a typical robbery, as a real thief would have likely taken them. It's possible the criminal was targeting specific valuables, but that's just speculation. Many neighbors later described the area as peaceful, safe, and where incidents were rare. The deceased had good relationships with neighbors and apparently had no enemies. Typically, Paul, like many residents, didn't lock his doors, trusting those around him as friends, not foes. Paul was well liked by his neighbors and was a respected physician. Police could not determine a specific motive for the crime. Strangely, Paul's car was missing, as was a gun in Greg's safe. Greg had a weapon for self-defense, but ballistics tests showed that the men had been shot with different guns. None of the neighbors heard the gunshots, which was highly unusual, suggesting the use of a silencer. Although there were several small houses near the Paul house, no one saw anything unusual. Forensic experts had not found any useful evidence in the house. Paul's car was found about 20 kilometers from the crime scene. The car was reported missing. The doctor's car was left in a parking lot near a dry cleaners, with the doors unlocked and the keys still in the ignition, as if the criminal had expected it to be stolen. Fortunately, police found the car. After a thorough examination, forensic scientists could not find any DNA or fingerprints inside. The criminal wore gloves or wiped away any traces. There was nothing in the surveillance footage. The killer acted professionally and avoided being caught on camera. With no leads, the police were left with limited resources. The police had nothing left but to start checking the immediate surroundings of the doctors in search of suspects. The first person they focused on was Monica, who had called 911. Although she had done the right thing by notifying the police and not entering the house herself, police questioned whether she knew what she would find inside and deliberately avoided going inside. After reviewing the evidence, they determined that Monica had no motive for Greg and Paul's deaths and had actually suffered a loss, because she and Greg are dating and are getting ready to get married. And Monica had a verified alibi and were eliminated as suspects. Likewise, Greg's ex-wife also had an alibi and was not considered a suspect. The investigation then focused on his father, Paul Jareth, a renowned psychiatrist. Although he could have difficult clients, and everyone was in a bad mood from time to time, people with problems could easily be hurt, leading to resentment. However, Dr. Paul's practice was impeccable. He was highly regarded by his colleagues and patients, and no dissatisfied clients were found. While police were investigating various leads, searches continued at the victims' homes. A forensic scientist found a letter from a credit union addressed to Paul, sent shortly before his death. The letter alerted him to some suspicious transactions on his bank account, which caught the attention of the police. They discovered that access to Paul's account had been granted to his trusted assistant Maria Katabi. This raised suspicions about her potential involvement in the tragedy. Police learned that Maria had repeatedly attempted to cash counterfeit checks at banks, involving the embezzlement of tens of thousands of dollars. However, despite her persistence, the credit union did not approve the fraudulent transactions. Maria had no problem with her salary. She earned a lot of money and Paul appreciated her work. However, it appeared that she had been stealing money from him, which was discovered by a strange coincidence. Just a few days later, Paul was found dead in his home, making it seem as if Maria had a strong motive for the crime. Maria therefore became the prime suspect. She was summoned to the police station to discuss the use of her boss's money. Maria denied any involvement in the murder, claiming that there was no reason to kill Paul as they had long since settled all their financial issues. A reliable employee reported that Paul caught Maria writing several counterfeit checks. She was struggling financially and had informed her boss about these issues. The assistant felt that resorting to illegal actions was her only option. Paul and Maria had worked together for many years, and he had grown very fond of her, trusting her completely. As a result, according to Maria, he forgave her financial fraud, and they continued to work together. Maria indeed had confirmed financial troubles, including tax issues and to her property. She was going through a divorce. Given these problems, Paul felt sympathetic towards her and did not plan to terminate her employment. During the investigation, it was found that Maria had stolen $100,000 from Paul. He trusted her so much that he didn't scrutinize her financial dealings. The last transaction she made was for $9,000. It was not possible to prove any involvement of the Maria in what happened. Maria had no other motive for any criminal acts and had a confirmed alibi for the incident, as did other possible suspects. Ultimately, the police reached a dead end and had to remove Maria from the suspect list. For many months, the case made no progress. Police repeatedly reviewed all the evidence but found no clues. Maria was the only possible motive, but her alibi excluded her as a suspect. Ultimately, police was waiting for the attacker to slip up in some way. They needed something concrete, like a murder weapon. The only forensic evidence was a few shell casings. Police hoped the killer would use their weapon again, making it possible to catch them. However, if the criminal was clever, they likely disposed of the gun used in the double murder. In such a case, police needed to wait for them to use a stolen gun. They constantly monitored news reports, focusing on gun-related crimes. The strategy was clear: all they could do was wait. The toughest time was for Alette Jareth, the daughter of the Paul. For months after her father and brother were shot, she returned to their home. In the Paul family, she was left alone. Paul and Greg were gone. Alette, grieving and alone, came to a house where she had lost her loved ones, an older brother who was killed, another family member who died after stopping NMI substances, and a third who died in a car accident. She didn't intend to stay long in the house, as its gloomy atmosphere was overwhelming. Her goal was to create a memorial video and gather the belongings of her relatives because the house was scheduled for demolition. Alette began recording, wanting to walk through the rooms one last time to remember the happy years when her loved ones were still alive. It reminded her of the day Paul died. She walked through the rooms, collecting items that were precious to her and had been left untouched for months. Among these was her father's jacket. While checking the pockets, she discovered a letter from her father's assistant, Maria Katabi. In the letter, Maria apologized profusely to her boss and elaborated on her family issues, struggles with redeeming the house, and tax debts. She confessed to embezzlement and promised to return the money once her problems were resolved. Alette turned to the police for help. They had several questions about the letter. They wondered why Maria wrote an apology letter if she claimed she and Paul were involved. It was clear she was lying about the boss knowing about her financial fraud. During the first interrogation, Maria didn't mention the letter, so the police asked her to come to the station again to explain. Maria, a trusted employee, admitted she had forgotten about the note. She explained that she was initially afraid to admit the embezzlement, fearing the boss would fire her. So, she decided to write a confession letter first and then speak to him in person. Maria left the note on her boss's desk at the end of the workday when he was gone but planned to retrieve it the next morning, as she had changed her mind and wanted to discuss the matter face to face. Unfortunately, the note was no longer on the desk the following morning, indicating that Paul had already taken it. In any case, she spoke with her boss, and they came to an agreement on repaying the debt. Maria's story seemed unconvincing, especially since the police had already caught her lying, which made them suspect her involvement in the case once more. However, there was no concrete evidence proving her guilt. 8 months after the murder, there was a real breakthrough in the investigation. A man was arrested for an unrelated crime. The most interesting thing is that he used similar firearms, a .22 caliber pistol. After checking, it turned out that his shells were identical to those found in the house of the Paul Jarrett. Meanwhile, a confidential informant tipped off the police about a planned armored car robbery. The criminals intended to recruit someone among the security guards to carry out their plan, which involved killing the other guards and stealing the cash transport. However, the security guard approached by the criminals decided to outsmart them. He informed the police of their plan, which led to the successful capture of the suspects. The individuals were identified as Jose Barca and Ruben Fernandez. Notably, one of them possessed the same pistol used in the shootings of Paul and Greg. Furthermore, a pistol stolen from the Paul residence was also found in their possession, eliminating any possibility of coincidence. This evidence confirmed their involvement in the double murder. The reason why no neighbors heard gunshots during the attack became apparent. The perpetrators had used silencers on their guns. During the interrogation, the police discovered that they had another accomplice, Juan Carlos Fernandez. He admitted to knowing Maria Katabi, with whom he had a romantic relationship that Maria had hidden from the police. Juan confessed that Maria had asked him to break into her boss Paul's house to retrieve a letter. Maria had previously stolen money from Paul and had written a confession of embezzlement, which she left on Paul's desk. She later regretted this but was too scared to ask the doctor to return the letter. Maria wanted to destroy the letter but had no chance, so she begged Juan to help her get it back. The consequences could have been serious, potentially costing her both her job and her freedom if her boss contacted the police. Not wanting to go to jail, Maria asked her boyfriend to help her steal the letter. Juan agreed and asked his brother Ruben and his friend Jose to do the job. Maria gave them information about the house. All she asked for was a letter admitting her embezzlement. She did not kill them. She also said that Paul's house rarely locked its front door, so gaining access to the house was not a problem, allowing the criminals to easily break in. However, they did not know where to find a small note in such a large house. Realizing that this might wake the homeowner, they decided that they would kill them first and then search the house without getting caught. So that is what they did. They shot Paul first, then his son Greg. Surprisingly, even after searching the entire house, they could not find the note they were looking for. The robbers then left, taking the gun with them. Despite a thorough police search, the note was never found. Paul's attentive daughter accidentally discovered this crucial piece of evidence. All three accomplices involved in Greg's shooting were arrested. They attempted to prove their innocence in the murders of the doctors. Jose Barca was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Juan Carlos's trial took much longer than those of the other defendants. He underwent mental evaluations and claimed he was not aware of the true nature of events. He had been struggling with significant mental health issues for many years, casting doubt on his ability to perceive reality accurately. It was known that he had suffered a serious head injury, which was exacerbated by a fall from a great height, worsening his mental problems. This was the main cause of the incident. Questions quickly arose as to whether one knew renowned psychiatrist Paul Jarrett and had a grudge against him, which could have been the real motive for the crime. However, these speculations could not be confirmed. In the end, Juan still had to stand trial. In 2016, nearly 13 years after the crime, he confessed to the murders of Paul Jarrett and Greg. He apologized to the victims' families and asked them to pray for him in the name of Christ. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. His brother, Ruben Fernandez, also admitted to being an accomplice in the robbery because he was the driver. Ruben said he did not know about Juan and Jose's murderous intentions. They had originally come to the house to retrieve a letter. When the shooting began, Ruben feared that the homeowner was shooting at the robbers. So he fled the scene. As a result, he was sentenced to 7 years of probation. This light sentence was due to a lack of evidence linking him to the murders. Maria Katabi was arrested and had to stand trial. She had a troubled past, but things seemed to improve when she got a job at Floordrot. She was desperate to find the letter, as losing it could endanger her life and job security. Maria had no previous convictions, so her lawyer was optimistic about securing a suspended sentence. Maria Katabi went to trial. The prosecution insisted on a harsh sentence for the double murder, arguing that she had orchestrated the crime by directing the perpetrators to Paul's home. If Maria had not tried to find the letter she had written and given to Paul, it is possible that both victims would still be alive. The prosecutor's office needed evidence. In the meantime, Maria was in jail and talking to another inmate. During one conversation, Maria made a surprising confession to the inmate. She revealed that the doctor had no intention of firing her or contacting the police, he just wanted his money back. However, Maria was broke and in danger of losing her home due to mounting debt. She had no intention of returning the stolen money. As a trusted employee, she knew the doctor well and knew about the valuables in his home, which she saw as an opportunity to make more money. Maria staged the robbery and implicated her boyfriend to avoid incriminating herself and reduce her sentence. The lawyer insisted that Maria could not be charged with double murder. She didn't shoot the victims, didn't plan the murders, and never even entered their house. The defense argued that Maria's primary target was the note, which could be crucial to serious legal charges, not murder. It was reasonable for her to get rid of such potentially damaging evidence. In her statement, Maria repeated her testimony. She gave the doctor the note with the plan to retrieve it the next day and discuss it directly with her boss. However, when she returned, the note was gone from the table. The woman admitted that she had lured her boyfriend and his friends into the robbery, not knowing that they were dangerous and potentially violent. During the trial, Maria tearfully shared tragic episodes in her life. She testified that she had been raped when she was 18 and had suffered abuse from her abusive father. She was regularly beaten by her husband after that. She hoped to escape this vicious cycle of abuse with her boss's money, but that plan failed. The jury found Maria Katabi not guilty of double murder, but guilty of armed robbery, and sentenced her to 30 years in prison. During the trial, Alette stated that she had let go of her anger and hostility toward the defendants. Instead, she chose to focus on the good memories of her loved ones and seek justice. Alette now plans to honor Juan Carlos' request by praying for him. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Velma Barfield. Velma Barfield was born on October 29, 1932, in Eastover, North Carolina, but grew up near Fayetteville. She is the second child in a family of many children and lived a life of abject poverty in rural North Carolina. Her family worked on a small farm growing tobacco and cotton. Her father, Murphy Bullard, was worn down by the struggles of farm life and had a temper as unpredictable as the weather. Velma claimed that her father was physically and sexually abusive to her and her sisters, though other relatives denied this. Her mother, Lillian Bullard, often suffered the most from her husband's anger. In There, love is a luxury that is hard to come by. This causes Velma and her siblings to experience a childhood deprived of affection and constantly threatened with violence. When Velma was young, she noticed the financial differences between her family and her peers. This awareness led to her first criminal activities. She started taking small amounts of money from her father to buy items her classmates had. She became more and more thieving when she stole $80 from an elderly neighbor. When her father found out, he beat her severely, and Velma stopped stealing for the rest of her childhood. Raised in a Christian home, Velma found comfort in her Bible, holding on to her faith despite her troubled home life. She has always considered her early exposure to religion an important factor in her chaotic life. However, as she entered her teenage years, the emotional wounds from her upbringing began to shape who she would become. World War II caused upheaval around the world. The war was over, but it still caused her family more difficulties and stress. Like many of her generation, Velma was forced to grow up early. Her dreams and aspirations are often overshadowed by the demands of life and family responsibilities. However, during this challenging time, her resilience and determination emerged, traits that would come to define her both admirably and tragically. When Velma entered early adulthood, her desire for a life beyond the limitations of her home grew stronger. She dreamed of escaping. At 17, she left school. In her quest for love and stability, Velma joined Thomas Burke, a relationship that promised freedom but brought new challenges. By the age of 19, she already had 2 children, a son named Ronnie Burke and a daughter named Kim. The family lived happily in Parkton, North Carolina, for over 15 years. Velma's life with Thomas seemed to be a hard-won escape from the poverty and violence of her childhood. In 1965, everything changed when Thomas was involved in a serious car accident and sustained head injuries. To manage the intense pain and headaches, he turned to heavy drinking and drug use. His battle with alcohol echoed the struggles of Velma's father, bringing back her past traumas. The abuse and neglect she had promised never to repeat began to affect her own family. The strains of an unhappy marriage, the responsibilities of motherhood, and her past experiences bore down on her. Velma began working at a textile factory but had to leave due to health issues. She needed an urgent hysterectomy, which affected her confidence and femininity. After the operation, she experienced severe back pain and started using prescription drugs for relief. However, she gradually became addicted, which impaired her judgment and led to future tragedies. On April 4, 1969, Velma had an intense argument with her husband. Later that same day, while she and the children were out, the house caught fire. Thomas, who was inside, died from smoke inhalation, and the house was completely destroyed. Velma and the children moved in with her parents. A few months after her husband's death, Velma started dating Jennings Barfield. They got married in August 1970. One day, the couple had an argument, after which Jennings mysteriously fell ill. On March 21, 1971, he died of a heart attack. Velma moved back into her parents' home. Shortly after, her father passed away from lung cancer. In the summer of 1974, her mother experienced severe stomach pain and was hospitalized. After recovering, she returned home. In August 1974, a man Velma was dating died in a car accident. On December 30th of that year, her mother was hospitalized again with severe stomach symptoms. Unfortunately, doctors couldn't diagnose or treat her illness, and she died 2 hours later. No autopsy was conducted. A series of mysterious deaths occurred around Velma. Her son Ronnie expressed sadness and confusion, questioning why God would allow such suffering to befall his mother, a devoted Christian. Meanwhile, Velma's addiction created financial difficulties, leading her to make another poor decision: check forgery. However, her dishonest actions came at a cost. The people around her no longer believed her. In 1975, Velma Barfield was found guilty of writing 7 bad checks and received a 6-month prison sentence. She was let out after serving 3 months. Following her release in 1976, she found work caring for elderly individuals. Her first job was caring for Montgomery Edwards, 94, and Dolly, his 84-years-old wife in Lumberton, North Carolina. Her first job was caring for Montgomery Edwards, 94, and Dolly. Her first job was caring for Montgomery Edwards, 94, and Dolly, his 84-years-old wife in Lumberton, North Carolina. Montgomery passed away on January 29, 1977, after falling ill. Just over a month after her husband's death, in February, Dolly began showing signs of a stomach illness similar to the one that had affected Velma's mother. Dolly's condition took a turn for the worse, and she died on March 1. Following this, Velma took on the responsibility of caring for 76-year-old Record Lee, who had suffered a broken leg. On June 4, 1977, Record Lee's husband, John Henry, started having severe pain in my stomach and chest along with vomiting and diarrhea. Initially, doctors believed he was suffering from a severe stomach virus. Unfortunately, he did not survive and passed away later that month. Later in 1977, Velma began living with her boyfriend Roland Stewart Taylor, who was related to Dolly. He was a widower and a tobacco farmer. The two attended a Pentecostal revival meeting in Cumberland County, where Roland suddenly fell ill with severe stomach pain. He was hospitalized and died a few days later. Those close to Stewart grew suspicious as they witnessed his rapidly declining health. Ultimately, their suspicions led the authorities to investigate Velma, starting a chain of shocking truths that gradually came to light. An autopsy has been performed as part of the investigation into Roland's death. The process was thorough, with each test, interview, and piece of evidence increasing the suspicion surrounding Velma. In a criminal investigation, evidence often comes from a small clue, a moment of intuition, or a previously undiscovered connection. For the team seeking justice for Roland and other victims, this evidence came through forensic evidence. Traces of arsenic were found in Roland's body. Before the autopsy results were announced, Lumberton police received an anonymous call, allegedly from Velma's sister, claiming that Velma had poisoned Roland and others. Velma was subsequently arrested for the murder of Roland. Following Velma's arrest, Jennings Barfield's body was exhumed, and traces of arsenic were discovered. Velma carefully crafted her lies, but they began to unravel. The art of interrogation is very sophisticated, involves back-and-forth communication between investigators and suspects, in which each question is intended to uncover the hidden corners of the human mind. For Velma, the questions the interrogator asked reflected the very questions she had long been reluctant to answer. In the interrogation room, before the clear evidences, the truth was finally clarified. To seeking comfort, Velma consulted a spiritual advisor. She discovered the courage to face her past. For Velma, confessing was a journey back to her soul. Filled with regret, she began to speak. A series of facts, long hidden by fear, shame, poured out. Her confession deeply pained her family, who were unknowingly entangled in her deception. The woman they love commits terrible crimes, causing them to rethink forgiveness and their notions of right and wrong. Velma admitted to poisoning Montgomery and Dolly Edwards, John Henry, her mother Lillian, and her boyfriend Roland. Although arsenic was discovered in Jennings Barfield's body, Velma claimed she did not kill him. Her motive for murder was to steal money from the victim to satisfy her drug addiction. Additionally, she took out a loan in her mother's name. Each of her mistake decisions, stemmed from addiction, greatly affected her life and those close to her. Confronted with the risk of being exposed, Velma made a decision that permanently changed her life. The transition from one crime to another can be a slippery slope. She repeatedly committed the unimaginable. Velma attended her victims' funerals, appearing to genuinely grieve their deaths. The weight of the secret left her alone, but the human mind, skilled at self-preservation, often uses justification to protect itself from harsh realities and finds ways to rationalize even the darkest actions. Velma would steal money from her victims and then poison them if they became suspicious. To outsiders, she appeared to be a devout churchgoer, a caring nurse, and a loving family member. However, she was caught in a struggle between the remnants of her conscience and her overwhelming desire to avoid the consequences of her actions. She forged checks on her boyfriend Roland's account. When he presumably found out, she mixed arsenic-based rat poison into his beer and tea to keep her secret at any cost. At the trial, Velma's defense team argued that she was insane, but this argument was rejected. She seemed unfeeling, even laughing at the prosecutor and applauding the district attorney after his closing argument. The prosecution described Velma as not being a churchgoer as she claimed, but as a calculating murderer, driven by dark motives, stating that she was responsible for her actions and deserved the harshest punishment. Conversely, the defense argued that she was a troubled individual, trapped by addiction, abuse, and uncontrollable circumstances. They emphasized that her mental health struggles are a factor that could reduce her responsibility for the crimes. In the realm of law and justice, the truth is often more complicated, deeply intertwined with human emotions. She confessed to committing 6 murders, but was only found guilty of the first-degree murder of Roland. In December 1978, the jury identified aggravating circumstances and sentenced her to death. At the time, there was no designated holding area for female death row prisoners, and Velma was the only female on death row in North Carolina. As a result, she was held at Central Prison in Raleigh, in a section for prisoners prone to escape and those with mental illnesses. Later, a unit specifically for female death row inmates was created at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. While on death row, Velma stopped using drugs and expressed regret for how pills had clouded her judgment and damaged her moral compass. In the solitude of her cell, she begins to confront her past. The nights were long, the faces of the victims haunted her dreams, and the silence intensified her thoughts and regrets. In these moments of reflection, Velma became fully aware of what she had done, the lives she had taken, and the pain she had caused. Her discussions with the prison chaplain were not just about appealing for a reduced sentence, but also about understanding atonement and the challenging journey of forgiving herself. While in jail, Velma admitted that she had never been a true Christian, her faith had been superficial. However, as she awaited her trial, she sincerely embraced Jesus, receiving forgiveness and salvation. In her autobiography, she wrote that throughout her life she was burdened by guilt because she did not know she could do better. What was more amazing, she said, was that Jesus was willing to be her friend. Even then, she could talk to him, and he listened. Velma became a dedicated Christian and spent her last 6 years helping other inmates find faith. Velma became a supportive figure for them in her unique way. Her active involvement in the Christian community, Velma had her sentence changed from death to life in prison. She wrote letters to Governor Jim Hunt, arguing that her newfound Christian faith should be considered a mitigating factor. Many Christians across the United States supported her, including evangelists Billy and Ruth Graham, with Ruth regularly exchanging letters with Velma. However, the victims' families thought that Velma's conversion was just a fraud and a ploy for her to avoid the death penalty. They see her as a cold-blooded woman who killed their loved ones. Despite this, Velma remained a devoted mother and grandmother. She cherished family visits every weekend and enjoyed spending time with her children and grandchildren. In 1980, psychiatrist Selwyn Rose evaluated Velma and testified in state court. He stated that she suffered from 3 disorders: multiple prescription drug abuse, an underlying personality disorder, and depression. However, Dr. Rose felt he never had a complete understanding of Velma. Velma's son, Ronnie Burke, asked her if she had killed Thomas. She responded that she was sure she probably did. She couldn't remember clearly but believed she had left a cigarette or match in the bed and then closed the door, leaving her drunk Thomas to sleep in their burning house. Velma admitted to the pastor that she had killed Jennings. She expressed relief that everything had come to light because she feared she might poison her grandchildren. Velma did not understand why she committed the murder and felt unable to stop herself. The governor of North Carolina denied Velma's clemency request, stating that her victims died in a torturous manner. An appeal was made based on testimony from Dr. Dorothy Lewis, a psychiatry professor at New York University School of Medicine. She claimed that Velma suffered from dissociative identity disorder and had shown patterns of manic depressive disorder earlier in her life. Velma filed her final appeal on October 30, 1984, in the North Carolina Supreme Court, arguing that she was incompetent at her original trial due to her drug addiction. This appeal was rejected in federal court. The day before her execution, she instructed her attorney, Jimmy Little, to withdraw all appeals. In her last hours, Velma chose to reflect and pray, finding solace in her faith. During that time, the renowned pastor Billy Graham spoke with her over the phone, saying that in a way, he envied her because she was going to get to heaven before he did. Before her execution on November 2, 1984, at Central Prison in Raleigh, Velma released a statement expressing her remorse for the pain she had caused. She acknowledged that everyone had suffered, including all the connected families, and offered her apologies. She also extended her gratitude to everyone who had supported her over the past 6 years, expressing appreciation for her family, her attorneys, and all those who had shown her kindness, including the prison department staff. She was thankful for everything they had done for her during those 6 years. She chose cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola for her last meal. She had her final visits with family and friends and mentioned that entering the gas chamber at 2 a.m. would be her gateway to heaven. She wore pink pajamas for the execution, with a stethoscope and heart monitor attached to her chest. A wheeled gurney was brought to her cell, and she was strapped onto it before being taken to the execution chamber shortly before 2 a.m. Outside the prison. Several groups of protesters gathered, including both supporters and opponents of the death penalty. Some protesters criticized Governor Hunt for lacking mercy and compassion, believing that the condemned could still contribute positively by helping fellow inmates while serving life in prison. Inside the prison, inmates banged rhythmically on their cell windows as they awaited the execution. Approximately 80 supporters of capital punishment gathered to cheer and applaud. The execution was carried out by 3 volunteers, with one intravenous line serving as a dummy so that none of the volunteers knew who actually delivered the lethal dose. Velma was pronounced dead at 2:15 a.m., 15 minutes after receiving the injection of proton bromide. Witnesses to the execution said Velma died peacefully, with no signs of pain. Around 300 death penalty opponents held a silent vigil, holding candles that were extinguished at the moment of her execution at 2:25 a.m. Velma's body was transported by ambulance to a medical school, fulfilling her wish to donate her organs for transplantation. She was later buried in a small cemetery in North Carolina beside her first husband, Thomas. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Richard Beasley. Richard Beasley, born in 1959, was from Akron, Ohio. He was mainly raised by his mother, who worked as an office worker. After finishing school, Richard became a mechanic. He had a criminal history that included a 5-year prison sentence in Texas for burglary, followed by 7 years for weapon possession. He later returned to Ohio under a new identity and tried to create a positive image by pretending to be a pastor and attending church regularly. During this time, he developed a drug addiction. Eventually, after being involved in a car accident, he stopped working and lost his source of income. Richard met Brogan at church. Brogan was the son of someone Richard knew from the motorcycle network. Richard decided to mentor Brogan, discussing the value of education and the dangers of drugs. However, despite his moral conversations, Richard was actually living a double life. He had found an apartment near the road, where he sought search for girls in need, homeless people, and drug addicts for trafficking. The police eventually discovered his actions, forcing Richard to change his identity once more. As a result, he shifted his focus to exploit homeless and unemployed individuals, intending to steal their money and personal information. Noble County, located in southeastern Ohio, is a sparsely populated area characterized by vast, deserted forests. It was here that Scott Davis, a 48-year-old man, relocated from South Carolina after having worked in the state for about 15 years. To seeking better opportunities, Scott made the move to support his mother, who was facing financial difficulties. Scott came across a job posting on Craigslist that caught his attention. The job description read, "Simply care for a 688-acre property and raise cattle." The position pays $1,300 a week and have the opportunity to live a beautiful two-bedroom mobile home. Although older and single individuals are preferred, but all qualified individuals will be considered. This is a short-term opportunity, so call now to apply. The benefits highlighted in the listing appealed to Scott, who was desperate for a job, and he decided to contact the employer early. After Scott heard back from Richard Beasley, the person who posted the job ad, he was quickly accepted for the position. They arranged to meet at Aeon's restaurant in Marietta. At the restaurant, Scott met Richard and his nephew, Brogan Raffi, who both appeared to be genuine farmers. Their trustworthy appearance made Scott feel at ease. Then, Richard conducted an initial interview and asked Scott to join him in the car to visit the job site. They drove to a remote forest area with no cell phone reception. Suddenly, Richard said to Brogan, who was driving, that "Can they stop here? He need to grab some equipment for the farm, near where they had shot the deer last time." After that, Richard and Scott got out of the car. Scott offered to help, and they began walking into the forest, with Richard following behind Scott. As they walked, Scott heard a clicking sound behind him, followed by some mumbling. When he turned around, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Scott understood he was the target next in line. Just as Richard was about to pull the trigger, Scott swiftly pushed the gun away, and the bullet struck his elbow instead. Scott then took off running, and Richard chased him, gunfire ringing in his ears, with bullets whizzing past and the sound of breaking trees and branches behind him. "Oh God, he's going to kill me," Scott thought as he faced the barrel of the revolver aimed at him. Stunned and terrified, he froze momentarily before he sprinted away. Scott was lost and unfamiliar with his surroundings, but that didn't matter to him. All that mattered was making his escape. Richard, the gunman, shot at him as he fled, hitting him in the arm and making him fall. Just as Richard was about to take another shot, Scott, despite his injury, got back on his feet and ran, with blood pouring from his wounded arm. Hoping to escape the gunfire, Scott hurried to his right and slipped between two large trees. He started descending a small, slippery slope, almost losing his footing. It was autumn, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. As he slid down, he flailed his arms to keep his balance, unaware of the pain from his gunshot wound. He knew he couldn't afford to fall. If he did, his chances of survival would vanish. Then, he began to run once more. He heard the gunfire of the revolver right behind him for the second time. A bullet zipped past his head, just inches away, causing a rush of air. "Oh God, he's not going to let me live," he thought again. Scott took refuge in a thicket of brambles and underbrush, ignoring the thorns and hooks that tore at his skin, leaving a trail of blood behind him. His only focus was to escape the maniac with the gun, Richard. Another gunshot echoed, startling him and led him to run even faster. His heart raced, his ears buzzed from the noise. And he shook from the sweat that drenched him. When Scott finally broke free from the thick undergrowth, he paused briefly. He felt disoriented, unsure of his next steps. All around him was dense vegetation, trees, bushes, and bare branches, and the murderer was still pursuing him. He could hear the sounds of someone crashing through the brush he had just escaped, and he realized he couldn't afford to stop. He needed to continue running. His legs trembled with fear as he heard his attacker getting closer, followed by the sound of a gunshot. He realized he was nearing his end, and the thought filled him with dread. He sprinted faster, but stumbled and fell, sweat stinging his eyes and obscuring his vision. His head spun, and all he could hear was a deafening ringing in his ears. Then, he struggled to keep running. His heart raced as if it would explode from his chest, and he finally stopped. He spotted a small ditch surrounded by thick plants and scattered fallen branches. He quickly ducked behind a large tree, straining to listen for the gunman. Scott could sense the fear radiating from himself as he groaned softly. He noticed that his arm was bleeding heavily, yet he didn't feel any pain at that moment. As his heartbeat began to stabilize, his hearing returned to normal. He could hear dogs barking in the distance and crows cawing from nearby trees. He listened carefully, hoping to detect if anyone was following or searching for him, but the forest was unusually quiet. Hiding there, he felt a mix of shock, pain, and trembling fear. Eventually, he became convinced that he had escaped his attacker, and he felt immense relief. Even after he was certain the murderer was alive, Scott needed 7 more hours to feel safe enough to seek help. When he found the chance to escape, he located a house and called the police. Noble County detectives arrived about 15 minutes later, and Scott told the officer everything, about Richard and the chase. Remarkably, he survived an 8-hour pursuit. Unfortunately, not all victims were as fortunate. Scott wasn't the first person to respond to that job posting. In fact, hundreds of people had applied and been accepted over the months before Scott's incident. After Scott escaped a life-threatening situation and reported it to the police, they tried to access the CCTV footage from the diner where he had met Richard and Brogan. However, they faced a setback. A fire in the surveillance room the night before had damaged the recordings, making recovery difficult and time-consuming. Meanwhile, the media reported on a man who posted fake job ads on Craigslist to lure victims into the woods, where he killed them. The shocking story has garnered widespread attention of many. In August 2011, 56-year-old Ralph Geiger was experiencing a difficult period in his life. He was unemployed and living in a homeless shelter in Akron, Ohio. After losing his job, he faced significant challenges. Ralph had graduated high school in the 1970s and moved to California, where he worked with his father in an antique shop. He returned to Ohio in the late 1990s and successfully started his own business, where he was able to hire employees and make a living by renovating homes and taking on various jobs. However, when the economy entered a recession and the housing market declined, Ralph's business began to struggle. By the end of 2010, he could no longer afford his rent, leading to his move into a homeless shelter. He lost his apartment and faced many hardships. Ralph was a lifelong bachelor, which meant he didn't have to worry about supporting a wife and children. His close friend, Summer Rowley, who is 26 and considers him like a father, often mentioned this about him. They developed a strong bond after he hired her to help clean his house many years ago. Ralph was known for his willingness to assist friends. In the summer of 2011, he visited the library every day to search for job opportunities. By the end of July, he excitedly told Summer he had landed a great job managing a 600-acre livestock farm and taking care of the nearby houses. This job not only provided him with a free mobile home but also a salary of $300 a week. Summer was thrilled for Ralph, believing he truly deserved this new opportunity. Ralph was happy and saw the job as an opportunity to regain his independence. Ralph reached out to Summer on August 8, 2011, to inform her that he would begin his new job in Caldwell the following day. Summer wished him good luck and said him to stay in touch. However, as days went by without hearing from Ralph, Summer became increasingly concerned. She attempted to reach him multiple times on his mobile phone, but each time, she only got his voicemail. By October, she learned that Ralph's phone number had been disconnected. When she called the number again, someone else answered, indicating that Ralph's number had been reassigned. Despite her worries about Ralph, Summer chose not to report him missing, as she wasn't certain he was actually gone. Ralph had disappeared in the past but always returned. A similar situation occurred just weeks before Scott's case, involving 51-year-old David Pauly, who have had a hard time in recent years. His divorce 2 years earlier had left him feeling unhappy and disillusioned. Starting over in his 50s was particularly challenging for him. After the divorce, David found comfort in using the computer and often browsed the web. One night in October 2011, he came across a Craigslist ad that piqued his interest. He discovered a job advertisement in the Help Wanted section for a farm caretaker position on a 688-acre farm located in rural Ohio. The job pays $1,300 a week and includes free use of a trailer on the property. Curious and excited about this opportunity, David, who lived in Norfolk, Virginia, thought that taking a break from the city would be a significant change. Rural Ohio, with its rivers, lakes, and wide open spaces, felt like a promising option for the change he desired. The fact that he would have a free place to stay would also help him save money. David decided to respond to the advertisement and soon received a reply. His twin sister, Deborah Bruce, frequently communicated with him. On October 22, 2011, she received a call from him while he was staying Red Roof Inn, Parkersburg, West Virginia, on his way to Ohio. David was very happy and excited as he shared the news about a job he found on Craigslist. He spoke about a farm in Noble County, Ohio, and his dreams of starting a new life there. His truck, filled with his belongings, was parked outside the motel. Deborah and David talked for a bit, with Deborah wishing her younger brother good luck and reminding him to stay in touch. David promised he would try, but he mentioned that there was no cell service at the farm. After they hung up, they had no idea it would be their last conversation. David's sister, unable to reach him for some time, saw news reports and contacted the police. They quickly realized that David was yet another victim of a man named Richard. The police searched the forest where Richard had tried to murder Scott. After searching for 2 days, they found a baseball cap that Scott had dropped while running, and nearby, they discovered a grave that had been dug in advance for Scott. A K-9 unit was called in, and soon after, they noticed something unusual. They uncovered another body buried in the damp soil, which had been shot in the back of the head. This body was identified as David Pauly. A few days later, authorities discovered another grave containing an unidentified body. The sheriff's office in Noble County requested assistance from the FBI to track down the person who had posted a job advertisement related to the case. They needed the FBI to trace the poster using the IP address and the details of the advertisement. It became apparent that the advertiser was searching for a particular individual, someone who could vanish without attracting much attention or concern. During the interview, Richard would not hire applicants mentioned they were married or had combat or martial arts skills. He was specifically seeking older men for the position. Additionally, he completely ignored responses from women who applied. The candidates who met his criteria were Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Scott Davis. Another suitable applicant was Timothy Kern, who is 47 years old. Timothy Kern was a divorced father and living away from his 3 sons. To take a job in Ohio, he had to leave his children at home. He responded to a job advertisement on November 10th, just 2 days after an incident involving Scott Davis. On November 12th, Timothy visited his sons to say goodbye before moving to Ohio. After he left, there was no further communication from him, which triggered the start of an investigation into his disappearance. About 2 weeks later, the FBI found that the IP address of the person who posted the advertisement was linked to a house in Akron, Ohio, owned by a man named Joe. He claimed he had not posted any ads on Craigslist and did not know anyone named Richard, but he did mention that a man had rented a room in his house. The police obtained surveillance footage from a diner and recognized a man named Richard Beasley, who is a local from Noble. When Joe viewed the footage, he identified the man, but Richard had previously introduced himself as Ralph Geiger. Police had no idea they had found Ralph Geiger, Richard Beasley's first victim, buried in an unmarked grave. They also found Brogan Rafferty, Richard's accomplice and a high school student. Brogan was swiftly arrested and taken into custody. Brogan agreed to share all the details of Richard's actions and to testify in court in exchange for a lighter sentence. He was also present when Richard brought Ralph, the first victim, into the forest, where Richard later lured David and Scott. Brogan wrote a report of the incident and said that they led Ralph into the woods on a hot summer night. He recalled hearing a loud noise and then going back to the car to get a shovel. When he returned, Ralph was still there, and Richard had thrown Ralph's clothes into a trash bag along with some personal belongings. Brogan also described digging a hole that was waist-high and probably about 4 feet wide. They struggled to place Ralph's body in it and sprinkled lime over him as a baptismal ritual. After Richard stole Ralph Geiger's identity, he dyed his hair, changed his clothes, and trimmed his beard to resemble Ralph. He then found a job and took pleasure in his actions. Many victims arrived with most of their belongings in their cars, which Richard later sold. Scott Davis informed Richard that he would bring his Harley motorcycle to the interview, and Richard was excited about that. The last victim of Richard was Timothy Kern. At 47 years old, he faced similar job struggles as the other victims. While looking for a new job, he found a promising opportunity that required him to relocate. However, Timothy was reluctant to move away from his children. Since his divorce in 1997, he had remained close to his ex-wife and their 3 sons, who all lived in Massillon. He was not only a dedicated father but also an enthusiastic baseball coach, always making time for his kids. When he couldn't be with them in person, he maintained their relationships through social media, especially Facebook. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on his Facebook wall about a unique job opportunity managing a 680-acre farm near Cambridge, Ohio. The position offered him a truck, housing that covered rent and utilities, and a generous weekly salary. His only worry was the farm's remote location, which had no mobile phone service. Although he was concerned about being away from his family, the job was too great. He planned to move on Sunday, feeling a sense of regret about leaving his cherished children. On November 12, Timothy went to his ex-wife's house to say goodbye and collect some essentials for his move. He cherished the time he spent with his sons before departing the next morning. One of his sons received a message from he, expressing his love, but no one realized it would be their final farewell. Unlike previous victims, Timothy was taken by Richard to a different site behind an abandoned shopping center in a can. Brogan dug the grave, and Richard shot Timothy in the back of the head. The police were not initially aware of Richard's address, but they eventually apprehended him. Unbeknownst to Richard, Joe, his landlord, had talked to the police, which led them to track Richard's IP address. As a result, Richard contacted Joe both by phone and through messages, which allowed the police to locate him. Richard was arrested on November 16, just 3 days after he killed Timothy. He faced charges for the murders of Ralph, David Pauley, and Timothy Kern, as well as the attempted murder of Scott Davis, along with various other charges. Richard Beasley and Brogan Rafferty were put on trial in 2013 for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauley, and Timothy Kern. Brogan was offered a plea deal, in which he would receive leniency if he provided information about Richard Beasley. However, he decided to reject the offer. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 counts of aggravated murder. Even though Brogan remained silent, it was difficult to deny Richard's involvement when the key witness and one of the victims, Scott, agreed to testify. There was also a significant amount of evidence at the crime scene, including the victim's personal belongings and identification found at Richard's home. Although he tried to deny it, all the evidence proved him guilty. Richard's trial took place later that year, and he was sentenced to death. He was found guilty of aggravated murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. In 2020, Richard Beasley was retried after a procedural error was found in his 2013 trial. He returned to the Summit County Common Police Court for resentencing, but the verdict did not change. He was again sentenced to death and received multiple consecutive sentences for his other crimes. At 61 years old, Richard participated in his sentencing via video link from the Chilo Correctional Institution. He was seated in a wheelchair next to his attorney, Don Hicks, and both were wearing masks. Richard's attorney argued against imposing multiple consecutive sentences on someone who was already facing the death penalty, suggesting it was unnecessary. However, Summit County Prosecutor Jacket Cor insisted that Richard's sentence should stay the same. Judge Kelly McLaughlin of Summit County Common Court supported the prosecutor's stance, stating that imposing multiple consecutive sentences was necessary to accurately represent Richard's criminal behavior. During the trial, Richard asked if he could get back a Celtic cross that had been seized during the investigation. He explained that the necklace had been in his family for generations and he wanted to give it to his newly married daughter. He insisted it was not related to the case, and it was the only thing his daughter would have from him. It's striking that a man convicted of murdering many innocent people would present himself as a loving father. This raises questions about whether his behavior towards his daughter was truly genuine or simply a strategy to appear compassionate to the jury. Richard's mother was there, convinced of his innocence. However, due to clear evidence, the testimony of the living victim, Scott, and the confession of his accomplice who testified in court, Richard had to accept the consequences of his actions. When the sentence was announced, Richard's mother did not speak further. Richard appealed the verdict but was unsuccessful. Since the trial, he has continuously claimed he is innocent, but no one believes him. He is currently at the Chilo Correctional Institution in Ohio, waiting for his execution date. Richard was close to evading capture, but his gun jammed, giving Scott the chance to escape. If Scott hadn't escaped and reported the incident, the serial killer in the woods might not have been discovered, leading to more victims. The situation began with an online job ad that the victims accepted without question. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jennifer Cronin. Jennifer Cronin and her daughter Susan lived in Essex, England. Jennifer was deeply devoted to her family and children. She was a kind, warm, and caring person who had a very attached relationship with Susan. They loved and admired each other greatly. This makes her cherish and appreciate their relationship. She grew up with a big dream, to one day having a family of her own, and children who would love and admire her just as she admired her own parents. In 1990, Susan was dating Kieran Lynch, a young bricklayer 3 years her senior. At the time, Susan was working as an apprentice hairdresser, known for her distinct style. Susan's friends were impressed by how Kieran treated her, often remarking that he seemed to adore her. Their relationship blossomed, and the couple got married in 1994. It was important to Susan that Kieran got along with her parents, which he did. In fact, Kieran quickly formed a close bond with wife's mother, Jennifer. Kieran and Susan had 2 daughters, Matilda and Molly, who were very close to their grandparents and visited them at least twice a week. As soon as they heard grandmother's, Jennifer, gentle voice, the girls would excitedly run to her. When they were young, they looked up to their father as a perfect role model, the most kind-hearted and generous man they knew. Despite his busy work schedule, Kieran made time for his daughters, using all his free time to be with them. However, there was another side to his personality. He was highly competitive and always strived to be the best in everything he did and had a desire to be in control, creating a perfect image of their family. Kieran struggled to cope with the stress of supporting his wife and 2 daughters. As a result, he often lashed out in anger, damaging things and creating chaos. Over time, his behavior worsened, especially when he had been drinking. His temper tantrums became more aggressive and intense, causing his daughters to view him in a different light. They vividly remembered the incidents when their intoxicated father would shout, criticize, and eventually turn violent, smashing plates, slamming doors, and overturning furniture. In times of turmoil, the girls would find a safe haven, hiding from their angry father until he fell asleep. They moved quietly around the house, making sure not to wake him. After these tantrums, Kieran would often feel guilty and try to make amends. He would fix the things he had broken the day before and attempt to explain why he had acted that way. He would sincerely apologize to his wife and daughters, promising that it wouldn't happen again. However, he never changed, and then the same thing happened again and again. Like many people experiencing domestic violence, Susan felt deeply ashamed and humiliated, which led her to conceal the turmoil at home from everyone. Despite trying to appear strong in front of her daughters, Susan would often break down in tears at night, confused and hurt by the transformation of her loving partner into an overbearing and controlling presence. Whenever Kieran came home in a bad mood, Susan and her daughters would make to close the windows so the neighbors wouldn't hear the loud arguments. Even the smallest thing could make Kieran's become angry. If Susan was late coming home from work, Kieran would search the town for her. When the daughters grew up, they started to stand up to their father when he was being cruel to their mother, Susan. At first, this seemed to make Kieran behave better. However, one serious incident happened when Kieran, angry, almost hit his daughter, who stepped in to protect her mother, Susan. Although the family tried to hide their problems from those around them, the truth was eventually exposed. In 2015, people close to Kieran noticed a significant change in his behavior and appearance. A friend who hadn't seen him in months was shocked, and they met unexpectedly in the city. Kieran had lost significant weight and looked gaunt. His demeanor seemed distant and contemplative. It wasn't long before the cause of these changes became clear. While doing laundry, Susan found a packet of white powder in a small tube in Kieran's work clothes that she was washing. This discovery explained Kieran's recent erratic behavior, and it filled Susan with fear. Susan confronted her husband via text, lamenting his choices and saying he valued them more than family. Kieran didn't make any excuses but instead asked Susan not to discuss the matter with their daughters. When large amounts of money started to disappear from their credit card, Susan tried to talk to Kieran about it, but he became defensive and aggressive. As a result, the home environment became increasingly tense and strained. Kieran's behavior becomes more and more scary. One time, while their daughters were away, he put a knife to Susan's throat and threatened to end both their lives. On another occasion, he set up a noose in the attic. As these frightening incidents grew more frequent, Susan realized that if she didn't act, the situation could have disastrous consequences. Despite her desire to protect her family, Susan found it hard to open up to her own mother, Jennifer, because she doesn't want her mother to be sad. However, Susan knew she had to take decisive action to change their situation. In November 2016, after 24 years of marriage, Susan and Kieran decided to separate. Kieran made the difficult decision to leave the family home and move back in with his parents. Susan understood that this was for the best, because their daughters are grown up and they should no longer endure their father's noisy arguments. Her top priority was the well-being of their children. The separation occurred with minimal conflict, and Susan was relieved, although she also felt guilty for not taking action sooner. However, it did Susan know that Kieran had no intention of giving up. After Kieran left, as the tension in the house finally dissipated, life started to get better, and for the first time in a long while, Susan felt happy again. She and her daughters were able to have normal conversations, watch movies together, laugh, and enjoy life without any stress. The worry about how Kieran would behave when he came home from work was gone. Susan realized that she was still attractive for men, and her confidence grew over time. People noticed that Kieran seemed to be moving on with his life, and Susan was glad that he had made some positive changes. Even though they were no longer together, Susan appreciated that Kieran was still a part of his children's lives. Susan had a tough time in her past relationships, so she was hesitant to get close to someone new. That was until she met Mike. As she slowly opened up to him, she shared stories about her previous, including her difficult past with her ex-husband, Kieran. To move forward, Susan knew she needed to finalize her divorce. Despite being nervous about Kieran's unpredictable behavior, she decided to take the first step by texting him to meet at a cafe to discuss their divorce. To her surprise, the encounter went smoothly. Kieran seemed to accept the idea of a divorce. And for once, they had a friendly conversation, reminiscing about their past experiences. They even exchanged kind text messages afterward, with Kieran expressing happiness for Susan's new relationship and Susan hoping he would find love soon. However, the next day, Susan received a barrage of messages from Kieran, and his attitude toward the divorce had taken a drastic turn. He now acted like he didn't care about his ex-wife, but he still had some demands. He wanted $60,000 in exchange for signing the divorce papers. Kieran argued that he had already left her the house and its contents, and therefore, he was entitled to compensation. But what worried her was Kieran's attitude in letting her move on. He couldn't stand the thought of another man replacing him. His texts even reveal a dark desire, her demise. At first, Kieran only threatened through text messages, but then he showed it through actions. He appeared in Susan's yard with a hammer, while she was home alone with her pet. Susan quickly called to request emergency assistance. By the time the police arrived, Kieran had already damaged some flower pots and outdoor decorations, but he had left the scene. 2 officers entered the property and listened to Susan's account. Kieran returned, loudly proclaiming his intent to confront his ex-wife, Susan, and said that no one could stop him. The police arrested Kieran for disturbing the peace. Even in handcuffs, he continued to insult his ex-wife. As a result, Kieran faced charges on 3 counts, making life-threatening actions, carrying a dangerous object, and causing property damage. On January 29, 2018, Kieran appeared in magistrate's court and denied all allegations against him. He was scheduled to appear in court again on March 29 and was released on bail under the condition that he avoid contact with Susan and stay away from her home. However, this decision left Susan and her daughters feeling uneasy and questioning the law's effectiveness in protecting them. Kieran disregarded the bail conditions and continued to contact Susan, violating the no-contact order. He repeatedly called her and even showed up at her residence, which intensified her fear for her safety. He falsely claimed to mutual friends that Susan's new boyfriend was sending him provocative messages. Kieran also targeted his daughters by contacting them, knowing they would inform Susan about his actions. Susan was on high alert at all times, worried about leaving her children alone due to Kieran's persistent calls, which sometimes exceeded 80 a day. These frequent calls often involved threats of him showing up at her location. When Kieran failed to comply with his bail conditions, Susan contacted the authorities again. During this time, Kieran made a concerning call to the emergency services and revealed that he tried to end his life but did not have the courage to do so. A team of psychologists and police officers was sent to engage with him. Upon their arrival, Kieran assured them he was fine, and as a result, he was advised to schedule an appointment with his family doctor. At the time, he did not appear to have any mental health problems. Kieran continued to harass Susan and family with calls and messages. He took invading their personal space. He snuck into the garage and cut off the power supply. He also tampered with the garden hose at Susan's mother's, Jennifer, house and would sometimes lurk under the windows at night. His actions caused fear in Susan, their daughters, and even her elderly mother, Jennifer. Despite Susan's repeated pleas for help, but the police were of no help to her. When they arrived, they took statements and promised to make and arrest Kieran, but they failed to do so. The police considered this a normal dispute between people going through a divorce, and they did not realize the seriousness of the situation. However, things took a darker turn when Kieran contacted his eldest daughter and made threats to sexually assault her. When Susan found out, she was horrified. The police launched a search for Kieran at his home but couldn't find him. They advised Susan and her daughters to go to a friend's house or to Jennifer's house to avoid having to stay home alone. Youngest daughter Matilda stayed at a friend's house, while the oldest daughter, Molly, went to visit her grandmother, Jennifer, who lived alone after her husband passed away. Molly and her grandmother, Jennifer, spent a peaceful evening together, watching TV, drinking tea, and chatting. For a short time, they were able to forget about Kieran's threatening behavior. However, when they went to bed, the phone started ringing. When Jennifer answered, there was complete silence on the other end, and she thought it was a wrong number. Nevertheless, the phone continued to ring repeatedly. Susan and Molly were anxious and uneasy due to the phone calls this continuous. Molly felt like someone was hiding in the garden. A shadowy figure appeared outside against the dark background. For safety, Molly locked themselves in the bathroom with Jennifer. It was around 2 a.m. Meanwhile, Susan's phone was flooding with more calls and texts, so she also contacted the police for help. Unfortunately, the police had limited resources and couldn't keep a constant watch for the person making the calls. They advised Susan to turn off her phone and make sure all doors and windows were securely locked. In the past 24 hours, the police had received 6 ask-for-help calls. However, the authorities claimed they didn't have enough personnel to send a patrol. On March 13, 2018, as her granddaughter left the house, Susan decided to visit her mother, Jennifer. She wanted to offer her mother comfort and reassurance, and she promised her mother that she would not stand by while her family was bullied and threatened by someone who did not accept their divorce. At 72, Jennifer stepped out into the garden with her dog, enjoying the warm daylight. From inside, her daughter Susan watched with a smile, happy to see her mother happy. Abruptly, a loud noise was heard from outside at 10:48 a.m. Kieran entered the garden with a container of flammable liquid. He yelled angry insults at his mother-in-law, Jennifer. Then he approached Jennifer, pouring the liquid on her head, face, and back. Jennifer was terrified and screamed as he continued. Susan quickly called the emergency services, asking for help. The operator told her to run out into the street to get away from Kieran, which she did right away. Susan sprinted to the end of the street and looked back, but no one was chasing her. Remembering her mother was still in the garden, she quickly turned around to return home. Just then, Kieran poured the remaining liquid on himself and lit it with a lighter. Flames erupted, engulfing he and Jennifer. Police, firefighters, and medical staff, along with an ambulance, quickly arrived at the scene. When Susan returned to her mother's garden, she was horrified by what she saw. Her mother and Kieran were badly disfigured. Her mother, Jennifer, had severe burns. Her hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes were completely gone. And her skin was badly charred. Despite being in agony, Jennifer made it clear to Susan how much she loved her and that Susan and her children meant everything to her. Even in her critical condition, Jennifer tried to comfort Susan, reassuring her that everything would be okay. Kieran was severely injured with burns covering his entire body. He was sitting against a wall, gasping for air and still smoldering from the fire. Susan was consumed by grief and anger, lashing out at Kieran for his actions. She was struggling to understand how the man she once married could cause so much harm to her mother, whom she loved and protected dearly, and couldn't fathom how their relationship had ended in such a tragic way. Kieran was arrested on suspicion of trying to kill Jennifer Cronin. Both Kieran and Jennifer were taken to the hospital with serious injuries. A few hours after the attack, Susan was called in for an interview to help figure out what happened. It was discovered that Kieran had doused himself and Jennifer with a flammable liquid and set them on fire in the garden. Kieran, a 50-year-old man, was going through a difficult divorce from his wife, Susan. She had repeatedly informed the authorities about his aggressive behavior, which was made worse by his use of illegal drugs. However, due to a lack of police resources, the situation spiraled out of control, leading to disastrous consequences. As a result, the incident quickly gained media attention, and the lack of decisive action by law enforcement was heavily criticized. The medical team informed Susan that Kieran's condition was extremely serious, with severe burns covering almost his entire body. This devastating news affected his daughters deeply, who remembered their father as a loving and caring person. One of them wanted to visit him one last time before he passed away. However, due to the extent of his injuries, only the tip of his nose was recognizable, and it had turned black from the burns. During this final visit, the daughter expressed her love for her father and mourned the tragic circumstances. A toxicology report later revealed that Kieran's body contained both alcohol and illicit substances. Meanwhile, Jennifer was also fighting for her life in the intensive care unit, with burns covering about a third of her body, mainly on her upper body and head. Despite undergoing surgical procedures, her chances of recovery were low due to the severity of her injuries. Susan visited her mother, Jennifer, in the hospital frequently, where she saw her mother's immense suffering. As the situation seemed hopeless, Susan had come to accept that her mother's passing was near and wished for her to be with her late husband, free from pain and discomfort. Unfortunately, Susan's mother only had a short time left. After 17 days, she passed away on March 30, 2018, at 13:32, with her family by her side. Although her time was almost up, her face remained peaceful. Susan held her mother's hand as she took her last breath, bringing an end to her mother's life on Earth. On January 21, 2019, an in-depth investigation began at County Hall in Chelmsford, aiming to understand the incidents that led to the deaths of Jennifer Cronin, 72, and Kieran Lynch, 50. Susan, who was deeply affected by these losses, initially felt angry towards her ex-husband, Kieran. However, the investigation showed that law enforcement did not handle the situation well, so Susan's anger shifted towards them. Although Susan was aware of Kieran's unstable behavior, she had not anticipated that it would result in harm to her family. Susan publicly expressed her dissatisfaction with the authorities' handling of their situation, criticizing the police for their inadequate response and unkept promises. Specifically, she pointed out that Kieran's failure to be held accountable for breaching his bail conditions contributed to the tragic outcome of Jennifer's life. Susan hoped that this incident would serve as a lesson to the authorities, preventing similar tragedies from occurring in the future. She emphasized that the police have a fundamental responsibility to protect and serve the community, a duty that she felt was severely neglected in her family's case. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sarah Ann Wood. Sarah Ann Wood was born on March 4, 1981, in New York. She grew up in a devoutly religious family. Her father was a pastor in a small town in the middle of the state. As the daughter of a pastor, Sarah spent a lot of time at her father's church, attending services. She attended Sunday school with her sister and brother. Outside of church, Sarah had many other interests. She enjoyed dancing, was passionate about poetry, and was an active member of her school's cheerleading squad. In her free time, Sarah enjoyed riding her bike around the neighborhood. The church, less than a mile from her home, was a frequent destination for her bike rides, whether she was attending a service, helping her father, or simply attending Sunday school. On August 18, 1993, 12-year-old Sarah rode her bike to church for Sunday school as usual. While other members of the church ran the classes, her father remained at home. Her parents expected her to return home in the afternoon. Right after classes ended. However, when the afternoon passed and she still had not returned, they began to worry. After waiting for a while, they went to the church, thinking that she might be with some friends, but Sarah was nowhere to be seen. The teachers informed them that she had indeed left the church on her bicycle after school, carrying some books, colorful folders, and a small board. Her parents were even more worried because the trip home from church only took a few minutes, and it was unlikely that Sarah would go anywhere, since she had all her belongings with her. Moreover, she always came home to ask her parents for permission if she wanted to go somewhere, which made them even more worried. Her parents followed the path to the church, asking the neighbors if anyone had seen their daughter. Given the small size of the town and the popularity of her father through the church, dozens of people quickly joined the search effort. They soon found one person who had seen Sarah walking towards her home around 2:30 p.m., just a short distance away. This new information made her parents even more worried and convinced that something terrible had happened to Sarah, prompting them to contact the police. The search for Sarah began immediately, with the local police department deploying dozens of officers to search the area. The sheriff also called in the help of the fire department, increasing the number of people involved. As news of Sarah's disappearance spread, dozens of volunteers joined the effort, quickly growing the search party to hundreds in just a few hours. The initial search focused on the route between Sarah's church and her home, with officers thoroughly searching the fields and woods along the route. Their search soon yielded a disturbing discovery. Just a short distance into the woods, Sarah's bicycle was found leaning against a tree. Police zeroed in on the area and quickly found items Sarah had taken from Sunday school hidden under a bush. This discovery suggested that Sarah had been abducted. The police hypothesis was that an unknown assailant may have dragged her from the road into the woods, abandoned her belongings, and then driven her away. The police department allocated all available resources to the search, while Sarah's family created informational flyers about Sarah's disappearance. With the help of dozens of volunteers, they distributed these flyers not only in their town but also in neighboring cities. The first day of searching for Sarah yielded no results, despite the best efforts of the police and volunteers. They searched the area around the road thoroughly into the night but found no new clues. The search continued the next morning with more people joining in. The state police also joined the investigation, focusing on identifying possible suspects. People in the town were interviewed by the police, who hoped that anyone might have seen a strange person, an unfamiliar car, or any other information that might be related to Sarah's disappearance. Sarah's parents set up a makeshift headquarters with dozens of volunteers to help locate their missing daughter. They printed and distributed flyers while also trying to find witnesses or any clues related to Sarah. The local media soon picked up the story, and in a short time, news of Sarah's disappearance spread across the country. The police received more than 1,000 tips and thoroughly investigated each one, but they hit a dead end. Unfortunately, these leads continued to yield no results. The public, who helped her parents raise a substantial $150,000 reward for any information about Sarah's whereabouts, however, this effort also yielded no results. The active search phase lasted about a week, but eventually the police concluded that they were unlikely to find any valuable clues in the area. They resumed their investigation, now focusing on finding potential suspects. The police searched for Sarah, checking local residents and convicted criminals from neighboring towns, but none of these efforts yielded any new information. Sarah's parents frequently used the media to appeal to the public for any information that might help locate their daughter. Despite these efforts, her disappearance remained a mystery for nearly 6 months, until a sudden and unexpected turn of events changed everything. On January 7, 1994, 12-year-old Rebecca began walking to school from her home in a small town in Massachusetts. As she walked down a quiet street, she noticed a man walking alongside her. At first, Rebecca did not hear what he was saying because she was listening to music through her headphones. After removing them, the man pulled out a gun and ordered Rebecca to follow his instructions or she would get hurt. He then grabbed her coat and they continued walking in the same direction. Rebecca quickly realized that the man was leading her to a car, and she quickly came up with a plan. She pretended to have an asthma attack, struggling to breathe. She sat down on the ground, causing the man to let go of her jacket, but he grabbed her backpack instead. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Rebecca slipped off the backpack strap and ran away from her captor. She ran as fast as she could to a large group of people nearby, a few hundred yards away, and told them that someone had just tried to kidnap her. The captor, still behind him, got into his car, took Rebecca's backpack, and drove away. One of the witnesses decided to follow him in his car. He followed the captor for a few minutes, then stopped at the nearest gas station and called the police. The witness provided a partial license plate number and model, and shared Rebecca's description of the captor's appearance. The police began searching for the car, checking the database for matches. They also sent information to neighboring towns, and that evening, their efforts paid off. A police officer driving through a small town a few miles away suddenly noticed a car matching the description. He stopped and knocked on the door of the house where the car was parked. There were several people inside. When the police asked who owned the pickup truck, the owner replied that he no longer used the truck due to his vision loss. Instead, his neighbor, Louis Lint, 43, often used the truck. Louis, a handyman, helped his blind neighbor with various household chores in exchange for the use of the pickup truck. Louis told the police that he had last driven the truck the day before and had not used it since. However, the police still asked Louis to come to the station for questioning, which he agreed to. At the station, Louis repeatedly stated that he had not used the truck that day and denied any involvement in the kidnapping. A devout Christian, he stated that he spent most of his free time at church and would not commit such an act. While Louis was at the station, the police took a photo of him and showed it to Rebecca and other witnesses in a photo lineup interspersed with photos of other men. All of the witnesses identified Louis as the kidnapper. Rebecca, who had gotten a close look at Louis as he was less than a foot away from her, was certain that he was the one who had tried to kidnap her. Based on this information, the police quickly obtained a search warrant for Louis' home and the vehicles in a pickup truck owned by his neighbor. The search of the vehicles led to a disturbing discovery: a small bag containing duct tape, a knife, children's sunglasses, and candy in the truck, which belonged to Louis and was also parked near their home. A further search of the home turned up a gun and Rebecca's backpack. A search of the property revealed a shocking discovery: a large secret room under construction underneath the house. With this accumulated evidence, the police arrested Louis for attempted kidnapping. Louis initially maintained his innocence but eventually decided to confess to the crime. He confessed to coming to Rebecca's town to find victims and carrying a bag in his car that he called his kidnapping kit. Louis's reason for digging a secret room under his house shocked even the police. He planned to turn the place into a bunker, fully equipped to hold his kidnapping victims. His plan included kidnapping 11 girls between the ages of 12 and 17 to satisfy his creepy desires. Once the room was completed, Louis did not plan to hold his victims for long, intending to kill them within a short period of time, usually a few days. A list was also discovered at Louis's home, which contained the names of several children living nearby. Further investigation revealed that Lewis had shortlisted these people as potential targets once his secret bunker was completed. Following his confession, Lewis was jailed pending trial for attempted kidnapping. The police continued to visit him to gather more information, and during one of these visits, he unexpectedly confessed to another crime. Lewis revealed that 4 years earlier, in October 1990, he had worked as a janitor at a movie theater in the same town where he later attempted to kidnap Rebecca. On the evening of October 22, he left work and saw 12-year-old James Bernardo riding his bicycle near the parking lot. Lewis immediately decided to kidnap the boy with the intention of assaulting him. There were no witnesses in the parking lot, and he had a bag containing a kidnapping kit in his truck, the same bag police later found during a search. Lewis initially offered James $5 to help arrange seats in the theater, which James accepted. However, upon arriving, Lewis tied James up. Lewis then drove his truck closer to the entrance, pulled James and his bike into the truck, and took James to his house. Lewis left James at home and drove to a nearby lake, where he dumped the bike. After returning home, Lewis attempted to attack James but was unsuccessful. Feeling the need to get rid of James, Lewis put him in his truck and drove to a neighboring state. There, Lewis killed James and dumped his body in the woods. A hunter soon discovered the body and reported the incident to the police. Despite an investigation, law enforcement was unable to identify a suspect for many years. When police compared Lewis's testimony with existing case information, they discovered many facts and accurate details about the crime. This confirmation was completely true. After his confession, news of Lewis spread rapidly throughout the country. Within days, the police realized that Lewis was a suspect not only in a failed kidnapping attempt and a secret underground bunker. He also confessed to a previously unknown murder. News of Lewis's case eventually reached the police in New York, who were looking for Sarah and Wood. They looked into the details surrounding Rebecca's kidnapping and requested more information about Lewis. Prior to this, analysts had created a profile of Sarah's potential kidnapper, and Lewis seemed to fit the bill. As a result, the police decided to interview him and visit him in prison. During the interrogation, Lewis mentioned that he frequently traveled to neighboring states to visit relatives. During these trips, he sometimes drove through small towns to look for potential victims. On August 18, 1993, Lewis claimed to have encountered Sarah walking along a road with her bicycle beside her. He said he stopped his car, got out of it, and forced Sarah into his truck at gunpoint. After tying her up, Lewis hid her belongings and bicycle in the woods a short distance from the road to delay their discovery. After driving Sarah hundreds of miles from her home, he took her to a remote area by a large mountain lake. There, he brutally attacked and murdered her. Lewis then dug a grave and buried her body. He chose not to reveal the exact location of Sarah's burial. However, Lewis provided police with a detailed account of the crime, as he had done with his previous victims. In an effort to find the body, police launched a large search operation around the lake. They enlisted the help of hundreds of volunteers, rangers, and the military. However, there was a significant obstacle. The sheer size of the lake made it nearly impossible for the search party to cover the entire area, even with so many people involved. And since it had been months since the burial, the site was likely overgrown. After weeks of searching, the group was unable to find a body or any evidence. Despite the lack of physical evidence, the detailed and precise testimony provided was enough to convict Lewis of the murders of Sarah and James. In January 1995, Lewis was sentenced to 17 to 20 years in prison for the attempted kidnapping of Rebecca. The following June, the trial for James's murder began, and Lewis pleaded guilty before the judge. He also told his lawyer that he wanted to confess to Sarah's murder immediately, but when he entered the courtroom and saw her parents, he suddenly changed his mind. However, Just 9 days later, when he was brought into an empty courtroom, he finally admitted his guilt. Despite this, he continued to refuse to reveal the burial location, despite the desperate pleas from Sarah's parents. The prosecution struck a deal with Lewis, offering to serve his sentence in state prison instead of federal prison in exchange for his help in finding Sarah. Lewis agreed to work with the police and pointed out a location near the lake, even sketching out a preliminary map. Although the police wanted Lewis to join the search, his attorney advised against it. Despite the challenges posed by the snow and freezing temperatures, the police mounted a massive search effort using heavy equipment and the assistance of hundreds of volunteers, but unfortunately, they were unable to find Sarah. A few months later, as fall approached, the police conducted another search, but were still unsuccessful. During this time, the police repeatedly asked Lewis to provide more specific details about the location, but he refused to cooperate. As a result, the prosecution decided to cancel the deal. On April 11, 1997, Lewis was sentenced to the maximum possible prison sentence of 25 years. The judge made it clear that if Sarah's body was found, the sentence could be the death penalty. During the trial, Lewis's attorney attempted to reduce his client's sentence. He admitted that Lewis was guilty of all 3 crimes, but argued that Lewis suffered from an undiagnosed mental disorder. Specifically, Lewis claimed to hear voices in his head and said that he had somehow communicated with protected aliens, but mental health experts found no evidence of a mental disorder. Instead, they concluded that he was probably faking it to avoid severe punishment. After the verdict, police frequently visited Lewis in prison in the hope of discovering Sarah's burial site. However, Lewis's behavior was erratic and he gave police several incorrect locations. He once stated that he was not ready to reveal the location because he had buried Sarah next to another victim and did not want anyone to find out who it was. Despite their grief, Sarah's parents also visited Lewis in prison, begging him to reveal where Sarah was buried. But Lewis refused to reveal this information. In addition to this case, police are investigating the possibility that Lewis may have been involved in other unsolved crimes. With his confession to the kidnapping of Sarah and James, investigators have considerable grounds to believe that Lewis had more victims. After Lewis was arrested, police discovered that he had made another attempt to kidnap a young girl several years earlier. He tried to abduct her from the street, but was thwarted when her father intervened. Although the family reported the incident to the police at the time, the police were unable to identify the perpetrator. It was not until Lewis's photo appeared in the newspaper that the girl and her father were able to identify him. In addition, Lewis was suspected of being involved in 4 unsolved disappearances between 1985 and 1992. Although police believed he was capable of these crimes, they could not find any concrete evidence and Lewis refused to admit to the crimes. After his conviction, police continued to visit Lewis in the hopes of finding out more information about Sarah's disappearance or his possible involvement in other crimes. For 8 years, Lewis remained uncooperative, but in 2013, he confessed that he was responsible for one of the crimes he was suspected of. According to Lewis, on November 6, 1992, he kidnapped a 16-year-old boy with disabilities who was on his way to visit his grandmother. Lewis claimed that he forced the boy into his truck, killed him, and then dumped his body in a lake. Police confirmed his involvement based on his detailed description of the events, but to this day, formal charges have not been filed against him in the case. Lewis is now 73 years old and is still serving a prison sentence for 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted kidnapping. Sarah's parents remain hopeful that he may eventually reveal her burial site, either through their persuasion or in a confession before his death. In Sarah's memory, her family has established an annual charity bike ride, which started out as a small event but has grown in popularity over time. Today, the event attracts thousands of participants who not only honor Sarah's memory but also contribute to fundraising efforts to help find missing children. Police have no plans to give up their search for Sarah's burial site, regardless of Lewis' willingness to reveal the information. They intend to continue searching the areas he has indicated until they find her.